do again. There we go. And maybe up a little time. Maybe down a little bit. It's gonna be where I'm working. Looks like it. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the live. If you're new to my live streams, they're some of the most boring live streams on the internet at the moment because I'm unoriginal, uncreative, and quite boring in real life. So I will be dismembering some, vintage 90s Beanie Babies because they're so collectible. I'll be disassembling them and then reassembling them into lovely little creatures. Two-headed monsters. So this is going to be spring and summer. And then I'm just going to go through the rest of them. But yeah, I guess we'll listen to some more Sherlock Holmes and cry over the fact that MatPat is retiring. Because, I knew it was coming. We all did. But I was still hoping for another 3 years. But, c'est la vie. That is life. And it sucks balls. I just feel like everybody's, life-wise gone through normal growth. And I'm just stagnant in the water, which is normal for me, unfortunately. Alrighty, let's go back to history. Kind of like Sherlock, because it's, whatchamacallit, pretty much, the same, they're short stories, relatively short anyway. The only problem I find with them is they don't provide you with enough information in the story itself to be able to solve the story on your own before the conclusion of it. So that kind of bites, but I guess it is what it is. It was written 100 years ago. Was it? A while ago, anyway.
He switched to TD Insurance.
Oh, sweet.
28% on his home and car insurance.
My mom got me a whatchamacallit for Christmas.
Saving
my own broom for the basement.
It's upon my brother. I should think it must be a most extraordinary one. He snuggled down in his armchair. Now, Watson, let us have the facts. The man's name was Arthur Cadogan West. He was 27 years of age, unmarried.
Oh, by the way, if you were looking for a specific Beanie Baby because you've had, in your youth, your childhood as a memory, and you really like just to have it back, message me on Etsy with a picture, of the one you want, and I'll take a look through my, my tote box full of Beanie Babies, and if I got it, I can send it to you. How's that sound? Sound okay? Yeah, let me know if you need a Beanie Baby.
And a clerk at Woolwich Arsenal. Government employee. Behold the link with Brother Mycroft. He left Woolwich suddenly on Monday night. Was last seen by his fiancée, Miss Violet Westbury, whom he left abruptly in the fog about 7:30 that evening. There was no quarrel between them, and she can give no motive for his action. The next thing heard of him was when his dead body was discovered by a plate layer named Mason just outside Aldgate Station on the Underground system in London. When? The body was found at 6 on Tuesday morning. It was lying wide of the nettles upon the left hand of the track as one goes eastward, at a point close to the station, where the line emerges from the tunnel in which it runs. The head was badly crushed, an injury which might well have been caused by a fall from the train. The body could only have come on the line in that way. Had it been carried down from any neighbouring street, it must have passed the station barriers, where a collector is always standing. This point is absolutely certain. Very good. The case is definite enough. The man, dead or alive, either fell or was precipitated from a train. So much is clear to me. Continue. The trains which traverse the lines of rail beside which the body was found are those which run from west to east, some being purely metropolitan and some from Willesden and outlying junctions. It can be stated for certain that this young man, when he met his death, was travelling in this direction at some late hour of the night. But at what point he entered the train, it is impossible to state. His ticket, of course, would show that. There was no ticket in his pockets. No ticket? Dear me, Watson, this is really very singular. According to my experience, it is not possible to reach the platform of a metropolitan train without exhibiting one's ticket. Presumably then the young man
Sounds
had
pretty good.
one. Was it taken from him in order to conceal the station from which he came? It is possible. Or did he drop it in the carriage? That is also possible. But the point is of curious interest. I understand there was no sign of robbery? Apparently not. There is a list here of his possessions. His purse contained £2.15. He had also a chequebook on the Woolwich branch of the Capital and Counties Bank. Through this, his identity was established. There were also 2 dress circle tickets for the Woolwich Theatre, dated for that very evening. Also a small packet of technical papers. Holmes gave an exclamation of satisfaction. There we have it at last, Watson. British government, Woolwich, Arsenal, technical papers, Brother Mycroft. The chain is complete, but here he comes, if I'm not mistaken, to speak for himself. A moment later, the tall and portly form of Mycroft Holmes was ushered into the room. Heavily built and massive, there was a suggestion of uncouth physical inertia in the figure. But above this unwieldy frame, there was perched a head, so masterful in its brow, so alert in its steel grey, deep-set eyes, so firm in its lips, and so subtle in its play of expression, that after the first glance one forgot the gross body and remembered only the dominant mind. At his heels came our old friend Lestrade of Scotland Yard, thin and austere. The gravity of both their faces foretold some weighty quest. The detective shook hands without a word. Mycroft Holmes struggled out of his overcoat and subsided into an armchair. "A most annoying business, Sherlock," said he. "I extremely dislike altering my habits, but the powers that be would take no denial. In the present state of Siam, it is most awkward that I should be away from the office, but it is a real crisis. I've never seen the Prime Minister so upset. As to the Admiralty, it is buzzing like an overturned beehive. Have you read up the case? We have just done so. What were the technical papers? Ah, there's the point. Fortunately, it has not come out. The press would be furious if it did. The papers which this wretched youth had in his pocket were the plans of the Bruce Partington submarine." Mycroft Holmes spoke with a solemnity which showed his sense of the importance of the subject. His brother and I sat expectant. "Surely you have heard of it? I thought everyone had heard of it." "Only as a name. Its importance can hardly be exaggerated. It has been the most jealously guarded of all government secrets. You may take it from me that naval warfare becomes impossible within the radius of a Bruce Partington's operation. 2 years ago, a very large sum was smuggled through the estimates and was expended in acquiring a monopoly of the invention. Every effort has been made to keep the secret. The plans, which are exceedingly intricate, comprising some 30 separate patents, each essential to the working of the whole, are kept in an elaborate safe in a confidential office adjoining the arsenal, with burglar-proof doors and windows. Under no conceivable circumstances were the plans to be taken from the office. If the chief constructor of the Navy desired to consult them, even he was forced to go to the Woolwich office for the purpose. And yet here we find them, in the pocket of a dead junior clerk in the heart of London. And from an official point of view, it's simply awful. But you have recovered them. No, Sherlock, no, that's the pinch. We have not. 10 papers were taken from Woolwich. There were 7 in the pockets of Cadogan West. The 3 most essential are gone, stolen, vanished. You must drop everything, Sherlock. Never mind your usual petty puzzles of the police court. It's a vital international problem that you have to solve. Why did Cadogan West take the papers? Where are the missing ones? How did he die? How came his body where it was found? How can the evil be set right? Find an answer to all these questions, and you will have done good service for your country. Why do you not solve it yourself, Mycroft? You can see as far as I. Possibly, Sherlock, but it is a question of getting details. Give me your details, and from an armchair I will return you an excellent expert opinion. But to run here and run there, to cross-question railway guards, and lie on my face with a lens to my eye, it is not my métier. No, you are the one man who can clear the matter up. If you fancy to see your name in the next honours list. My friend smiled and shook his head. I play the game for the game's own sake, said he. But the problem certainly presents some points of interest, and I shall be very pleased to look into it. Some more facts, please. I have jotted down the more essential ones upon this sheet of paper, together with a few addresses, which you will find of service. The actual official guardian of the papers is the famous government expert Sir James Walter, whose decorations and subtitles fill 2 lines of a book of reference. He has grown grey in the service, is a gentleman, a favoured guest in the most exalted houses, and, above all, a man whose patriotism is beyond suspicion. He is one of 2 who have a key of the safe. I may add that the papers were undoubtedly in the office during working hours on Monday, and that Sir James left for London about 3 o'clock, taking his key with him. He was at the house of Admiral Sinclair at Berkeley Square during the whole of the evening when this incident occurred. Has the fact been verified? Yes. His brother, Colonel Valentine Walter, has testified to his departure from Woolwich, and Admiral Sinclair to his arrival in London. So Sir James is no longer a direct factor in the problem. Who was the other man with a key? The senior clerk and draftsman, Mr. Sidney Johnson. He is a man of 40, married, with 5 children.
Jesus.
He is a silent, morose man, but he has on the whole an excellent record in the public service. He is unpopular with his colleagues, but a hard worker, according to his own account, corroborated only by the word of his wife. He was at home the whole of Monday evening after office hours, and his key has never left the watch chain upon which it hangs. Tell us about Cadogan West. He has been 10 years in the service and has done good work. He has the reputation of being hot-headed and imperious, but a straight, honest man. We have nothing against him. He was next Sidney Johnson in the office. His duties brought him into daily personal contact with the plans. No one else had the handling of them. Who locked up the plans that night? Mr. Sidney Johnson, the senior clerk? Well, it is surely perfectly clear who took them away. They're actually found upon the person of this junior clerk, Cadogan West. That seems final, does it not? It does, Sherlock, and yet it leaves so much unexplained. In the first place, why did he take them? I presume they were of value. He could have got several thousands for them very easily. Can you suggest any possible motive for taking the papers to London, except to sell them? No, I cannot. Then we must take that as our working hypothesis. Young West took the papers. Now this could only be done by having a false key. Several false keys. He had to open the building and the room. He had then several false keys. He took the papers to London to sell the secret, intending no doubt to have the plans themselves back in the safe next morning before they were missed. While in London on this treasonable mission, he met his end.
Hello.
How? We will suppose that he was travelling back to Woolwich when he was killed and thrown out of the compartment. Aldgate, where the body was found, is considerably past the station London Bridge, which would be his route to Woolwich. Many circumstances could be imagined under which he would pass London Bridge. There was someone in the carriage, for example, with whom he was having an absorbing interview. His interview led to a violent scene in which he lost his life. Possibly he tried to leave the carriage, fell out on the line, and so met his end. The other closed the door. There was a thick fog, and nothing could be seen. No better explanation can be given with our present knowledge, and yet consider, Sherlock, how much you leave untouched. We will suppose for argument's sake that young Cadogan West had determined to convey these papers to London. He would naturally have made an appointment with the foreign agent and kept his evening clear. Instead of that, he took 2 tickets for the theatre, escorted his fiancée halfway there, and then suddenly disappeared. A blind, said Lestrade, who had sat listening with some impatience to the conversation. A very singular one. That is objection number one. Objection number two. We will suppose that he reaches London and sees the foreign agent. He must bring back the papers before morning or the loss will be discovered. He took away 10. Only 7 were in his pocket. What had become of the other 3? He certainly would not leave them of his own free will. Then again, where is the price of his treason? One would have expected to find a large sum of money in his pocket. It seems to me perfectly clear, said Lestrade. I have no doubt at all as to what occurred. He took the papers to sell them. He saw the agent. They could not agree as to price. He started home again, but the agent went with him. In the train, the agent murdered him, took the more essential papers, and threw his body from the carriage. That would account for everything, would it not? Why had he no ticket? The ticket would have shown which station was nearest the agent's house. Therefore, he took it from the murdered man's pocket. Good, Lestrade, very good, said Holmes. Your theory holds together, but if this is true, then the case is at an end. On the other hand, the traitor is dead. On the other, the plans of the Bruce Partington submarine are presumably already on the continent. What is there for us to do? To act, Sherlock, to act, cried Mycroft, springing to his feet. All my instincts are against this explanation. Use your powers. Go to the scene of the crime. See the people concerned. Leave no stone unturned. In all your career, you have never had so great a chance of serving your country. Well, well, said Holmes, shrugging his shoulders. Come, Watson, and you, Lestrade, could you favour us with your company for an hour or two? We will begin our investigation by a visit to Aldgate Station. Goodbye, Mycroft. I shall let you have a report before evening, but I warn you in advance that you have little to expect. An hour later, Holmes, Lestrade and I stood upon the Underground Railroad at the point where it emerges from the tunnel immediately before Aldgate Station. A courteous, red-faced old gentleman represented the railway company. This is where the young man's body lay, said he, indicating a spot about 3 feet from the metals. It could not have fallen from above, for these, as you see, are all blank walls. Therefore, it could only have come from a train, and that train, so far as we can trace it, must have passed about midnight on Monday. Have the carriages been examined for any sign of violence? There are no such signs, and no ticket has been found. No record of a door being found open? None. We've had some fresh evidence this morning, said Lestrade. A passenger who passed Aldgate in an ordinary Metropolitan train about 11:40 on Monday night declares that he heard a heavy thud as of a body striking the line just before the train reached the station. There was dense fog, however, and nothing could be seen. He made no report of it at the time. Why, whatever is the matter with Mr. Holmes? My friend was standing with an expression of strained intensity upon his face, staring at the railway metals where they curved out of the tunnel. Aldgate is a junction, and there was a network of points. On these his eager, questioning eyes were fixed, and I saw on his keen, alert face that tightening of the lips, that quiver of the nostrils, and concentration of the heavy, tufted brows which I knew so well. Points, he muttered, the points. What of it? What do you mean? I suppose there are no great number of points on a system such as this. No, they are very few. And a curve, too. Points and a curve. By Jove. If it were only so. What is it, Mr. Holmes? Have you a clue? An idea. An indication. No more. But the case certainly grows in interest. Unique. Perfectly unique. And yet, why not? I do not see any indications of bleeding on the line. There were hardly any. But I understand that there was a considerable...
He was dead before he was thrown off the train.
The bone was crushed, but there was no great external injury. And yet one would have expected some bleeding. Would it be possible for me to inspect the train which contained the passenger who heard the thud of a fall in the fog? I fear not, Mr. Holmes. The train has been broken up before now, and the carriages redistributed. I can assure you, Mr. Holmes, said Lestrade, that every carriage has been carefully examined. I saw to it myself. It was one of my friend's most obvious weaknesses. that he was impatient with less alert intelligences than his own. Very likely, said he, turning away. As it happens, it was not the carriages which I desired to examine. Watson, we have done all we can here. We need not trouble you any further, Mr. Lestrade. I think our investigations must now carry us to Woolwich. At London Bridge, Holmes wrote a telegram to his brother, which he handed to me before dispatching it. It ran thus: see some light in the darkness, but it may possibly flicker out. Meanwhile, please send by messenger to await return at Baker Street a complete list of all foreign spies or international agents known to be in England, with full address. Sherlock. That should be helpful, Watson, he remarked as we took our seats in the Woolwich train. We certainly owe Brother Mycroft a debt for having introduced us to what promises to be a really very remarkable case. His eager face still wore that expression of intense and high-strung energy, which showed me that some novel and suggestive circumstance had opened up a stimulating line of thought. See the foxhound with hanging ears and droopy tail as it lolls about the kennels, and compare it with the same hound as, with gleaming eyes and straining muscles, it runs upon a breast-high scent. Such was the change in Holmes since the morning. He was a different man from the limp and lounging figure in the mouse-coloured dressing gown who had prowled so restlessly only a few hours before round the fog-girt room. There is material here. There is scope, said he. I am dull indeed not to have understood its possibilities. Even now they are dark to me. The end is dark to me also. But I have hold of one idea which may lead us far. The man met his death elsewhere.
Yeah.
And his body was on the roof of a carriage. On the roof. Remarkable, is it not? But consider the facts. Is it a coincidence that it is found at the very point where the train pitches and sways as it comes round on the points? Is not that the place where an object upon the roof might be expected to fall off? The points would affect no object inside the train. Either the body fell from the roof, or a very curious coincidence has occurred. But now consider the question of the blood. Of course, there was no bleeding on the line if the body had bled elsewhere. Each fact is suggestive in itself. Together they have a cumulative force. And the ticket too, I cried. Exactly. We could not explain the absence of a ticket. This would explain it. Everything fits together. But suppose it were so, we are still as far as ever from unravelling the mystery of his death. Indeed, it becomes not simpler, but stranger, perhaps, said Holmes thoughtfully. Perhaps. He relapsed into a silent reverie, which lasted until the slow train drew up at last in Woolwich Station. There he called a cab and drew Mycroft's paper from his pocket. We have quite a little round of afternoon calls to make, said he. I think that Sir James Walter claims our first attention. The house of the famous official was a fine villa with green lawns stretching down to the Thames. As we reached it, the fog was lifting, and a thin, watery sunshine was breaking through. A butler answered our ring. Sir James, sir, said he with solemn face. Sir James died this morning. Good heavens, cried Holmes in amazement. How did he die? Perhaps you would care to step in, sir, and see his brother, Colonel Valentine? Yes, we had best do so. We were ushered into a dim-lit drawing-room, where an instant later we were joined by a very tall, handsome, light-bearded man of 50. The younger brother of the dead scientist. His wild eyes, stained cheeks, and unkempt hair all spoke of the sudden blow which had fallen upon the household. He was hardly articulate as he spoke of it. It was this horrible scandal, said he. My brother, Sir James, was a man of very sensitive honour, and he could not survive such an affair. It broke his heart. He was always so proud of the efficiency of his department, and this was a crushing blow. We had hoped that he might have given us some indications which would have helped us to clear the matter up. I assure you that it was all a mystery to him, as it is to you and to all of us. He had already put all his knowledge at the disposal of the police. Naturally, he had no doubt that Cadogan West was guilty. But all the rest was inconceivable. You cannot throw any new light upon the affair? I know nothing myself, save what I have read or heard. I have no desire to be discourteous. But you can understand, Mr. Holmes, that we are much disturbed at present. And I must ask you to hasten this interview to an end. This is indeed an unexpected development, said my friend when we had regained the cab. I wonder if the death was natural, or whether the poor old fellow killed himself. If the latter, may it be taken as some sign of self-reproach for duty neglected? We must leave that question to the future. Now we shall turn to the Cadogan Wests. A small but well-kept house in the outskirts of the town sheltered the bereaved mother. The old lady was too dazed with grief to be of any use to us, but at her side was a white-faced young lady who introduced herself as Miss Violet Westbury, the fiancée of the dead man and the last to see him upon that fatal night. I cannot explain it, Mr. Holmes, she said. I have not shut an eye since the tragedy, thinking night and day what the true meaning of it can be. Arthur was the most single-minded, chivalrous, patriotic man upon earth. He would have cut his right hand off before he would sell a state secret and hide it to his keeping.
He was frightened.
It is absurd, impossible, prepreposterous
or he was
to
trying
anyone
to
who
keep
knew
him
him.
safe.
But the facts, Miss Westbury. Yes, I admit I cannot explain them. Was he in any want of money? No, his needs were very simple, and his salary ample. He had saved a few hundreds, and we were to marry at the new year. No signs of any mental excitement? Come, Miss Westbury, be absolutely frank with us. The quick eye of my companion had noted some change in her manner. She coloured and hesitated. Yes, she said at last. I had a feeling that there was something on his mind. For long? Only for the last week or so. He was thoughtful and worried. Once I pressed him about it. He admitted that there was something, and that it was concerned with his official life. It is too serious for me to speak about, even to you, said he. I could get nothing more. Holmes looked grave. Go on, Miss Westbury. Even if it seems to tell against him, go on. We cannot say what it may lead to. Indeed, I have nothing more to tell. Once or twice it seemed to me that he was on the point of telling me something. He spoke one evening of the importance of the secret, and I have some recollection that he said that no doubt foreign spies would pay a great deal to have it. My friend's face grew graver still. Anything else?
Ow.
He said that we were slack about such matters, that it would be easy for a traitor to get the plans. Was it only recently that he made such remarks? Yes, quite recently. Now, tell us of that last evening. We were to go to the theatre. The fog was so thick that a cab was useless. We walked, and our way took us close to the office. Suddenly, he darted away into the fog, without a word. He gave an exclamation, that was all. I waited, but he never returned. Then I walked home. Next morning, after the office opened, they came to inquire. About 12 o'clock, we heard the terrible news. Oh, Mr. Holmes, if you could only save his honour. It was so much to him. Holmes shook his head sadly. Come, Watson, said he, our ways lie elsewhere. Our next station must be the office from which the papers were taken. It was black enough before against this young man, but our inquiries make it blacker, he remarked as the cab lumbered off. His coming marriage gives a motive for the crime. He naturally wanted money. The idea was in his head since he spoke about it. He nearly made the girl an accomplice in the treason by telling her his plans. It is all very bad. But surely Holmes' character goes for something. Then again, why should he leave the girl in the street and dart away to commit a felony? Exactly. There are certainly objections. But it is a formidable case which they have to meet. Mr. Sidney Johnson, the senior clerk, met us at the office and received us with that respect which my companion's card always commanded. He was a thin, gruff, bespectacled man of middle age, his cheeks haggard and his hands twitching from the nervous strain to which he had been subjected. "It is bad, Mr. Holmes, very bad. Have you heard of the death of the chief?" "We have just come from his house. The place is disorganized. The chief dead. Cadogan West dead. Our papers stolen. And yet, when we closed our door on Monday evening, we were as efficient an office as any in the government service. Good God, it's dreadful to think of, that West, of all men, should have done such a thing." "You are sure of his guilt, then?" "I can see no other way out of it. And yet I would have trusted him as I trust myself." "At what hour was the office closed on Monday?" "At 5. "Did you close it?" "I'm always the last man out." "Where were the plans?" "In that safe. I put them there myself." "Is there no watchman to the building?" "There is, but he has other departments to look after as well. He is an old soldier and a most trustworthy man. He saw nothing that evening. Of course, the fog was very thick." "Suppose that Cadogan West wished to make his way into the building after hours. He would need 3 keys, would he not, before he could reach the papers?" "Yes, he would. The key of the outer door, the key of the office, and the key of the safe." "Only Sir James Walter and you had those keys?" "I had no keys of the doors, only of the safe." "Was Sir James a man who was orderly in his habits?" "Yes, I think he was. I know that so far as those 3 keys are concerned, he kept them on the same ring. I've often seen them there." "And that ring went with him to London?" "He said so." "And your key never left your possession?" "Never." "Then West, if he is the culprit, must have had a duplicate. And yet none was found upon his body. One other point. If a clerk in this office desired to sell the plans, would it not be simpler to copy the plans for himself than to take the originals as was actually done?" "It would take considerable technical knowledge to copy the plans in an effective way." "But I suppose either Sir James or you or West has that technical knowledge." "No doubt we had. But I beg you won't try to drag me into the matter, Mr. Holmes. What is the use of our speculating in this way when the original plans were actually found on West?" "Well, it is certainly singular that he should run the risk of taking originals if he could safely have taken copies, which would have equally served his turn. Singular, no doubt, and yet he did so. Every inquiry in this case reveals something inexplicable. Now there are 3 papers still missing. They are, as I understand, the vital ones." "Yes, that is so." "Do you mean to say that anyone holding these 3 papers, and without the 7 others, could
I feel so tall.
construct a Bruce Partington submarine?" "I reported to that effect to the Admiralty, but today I have been over the drawings again, and I'm not so sure of it. The double valves with the automatic self-adjusting slots are drawn in one of the papers which have been returned. Until the foreigners had invented that for themselves, they could not make the boat. Of course, they might soon get over the difficulty, but the 3 missing drawings are the most important?" "Undoubtedly." "I think, with your permission, I will now take a stroll round the premises. I do not recall any other questions that I desire to ask."
Hello.
He examined the lock of the safe, the door of the room, and finally the iron shutters of the window.
Pardon my butt.
It was only when we were on the lawn outside that his interest was strongly excited. There was a laurel bush outside the window,
Oh, the
and
elephants.
several of the branches bore
Left and right,
signs of
because
having
the
been
only thing
twisted
Americans can
or
do is
snapped.
left and right.
He examined them carefully with his lens, and then some dim and vague marks upon the earth beneath. Finally, he asked the chief clerk to close the iron shutters, and he pointed out to me that they hardly met in the centre, and that it would be possible for anyone outside to see what was going on within the room. The indications are ruined by 3 days' delay. They may mean something or nothing. Well, Watson, I do not think that Woolwich can help us further. It is a small crop which we have gathered. Let us see if we can do better in London. Yet we added one more sheaf to our harvest before we left Woolwich Station. The clerk in the ticket office was able to say with confidence that he saw Cadogan West, whom he knew well by sight, upon the Monday night, and that he went to London by the 8:15 to London Bridge.
There we go.
He was alone and took a single third-class ticket. The clerk was struck at the time by his excited and nervous manner. So shaky was he that he could hardly pick up his change, and the clerk had helped him with it.
All of them will be
The
decapitated.
timetable showed that the 8:15 was the first train which it was possible for West to take after he had left the lady about 7:30. "Let us reconstruct, Watson," said Holmes after half an hour of silence. "I am not aware that in all our joint researches
Okay.
we have ever
That's
had
one
a
done.
case which was more difficult
That's
to
two.
get.
That's
Every
three.
fresh advance which we make
Minus the fuzzies.
only reveals a fresh ridge beyond.
Alright, let's see if we can partner
We
up
have
with
surely
here.
made some appreciable
Oh,
progress.
my hand hurts.
The effect of our inquiries
Arthritis.
at Woolwich has in the main been against young Cadogan West, but the indications at the window would lend themselves to a more favourable hypothesis. Let us suppose, for example, that he had been approached by some foreign agent. It might have been done under such pledges as would have prevented him from speaking of it, and yet would have affected his thoughts in the direction indicated
Pink
by his remarks
and
to his
blue. How
fiancée.
does that look?
Very good.
These guys?
We will now
Maybe this
suppose
one.
that as he went to the
I
theatre
like
with the
this
young
one better.
lady, he
Right,
suddenly,
that's one
in the fog, caught a glimpse of this same agent going in the direction of the office.
Pink and blue. So
He was an impetuous man, quick in his decisions. Everything gave way to his duty. He followed the man, reached the window, saw the abstraction of the documents, and pursued the thief. In this way we get over the objection that no one would take originals when he could make copies. This outsider had to take originals. And so far it holds together. What is the next step? Then we come into difficulties. One could imagine that under such circumstances the first act of young Cadogan West would be to seize the villain and raise the alarm. Why did he not do so? Could it have been an official superior who took the papers? That would explain West's conduct. Or could the chief have given West the slip in the fog, and West started at once to London to head him off from his own rooms, presuming that he knew where the rooms were? The call must have been very pressing, since he left his girl standing in the fog and made no effort to communicate with her. Our scent runs cold here, and there is a vast gap between either hypothesis and the laying of West's body, with 7 papers in his pocket, on the roof of a metropolitan train. My instinct now is to work from the other end. If Mycroft has given us the list of addresses, we may be able to pick our man and follow 2 tracks instead of 1. Surely enough, a note awaited us at Baker Street. A government
These two can
messenger
go
had
together?
brought it post-haste. Holmes glanced at it and threw it over to me. There are numerous small fry, but few who would handle so big an affair. The only men worth considering are Adolphe Mayer of 13 Great George Street, Westminster, Louis de Rothier of Camden Mansions, Notting Hill, and Hugo Oberstein, 13 Caulfield Gardens, Kensington. The latter was known to be in town on Monday and is now reported as having left. Glad to hear you have seen some light. The Cabinet awaits your final report with the utmost anxiety. Urgent representations have arrived from the very highest quarter. The whole force of the state is at your back, if you should need it. Mycroft. I'm afraid, said Holmes, smiling, that all the Queen's horses and all the Queen's men cannot avail in this matter. He had spread out his big map of London and leaned eagerly over it. Well, well, said he presently, with an exclamation of satisfaction. Things are turning a little in our direction at last. Why, Watson, I do honestly believe that we are going to pull it off after all. He slapped me on the shoulder with a sudden burst of hilarity. I'm going out now. It is only a reconnaissance. I will do nothing serious without my trusted comrade and biographer at my elbow. Do you stay here, and the odds are that you will see me again in an hour or two. If time hangs heavy, get foolscap and a pen, and begin your narrative of how we saved the state. I felt some reflection of his elation in my own mind, for I knew well that he would not depart so far from his usual austerity of demeanour unless there was good cause for exultation. All the long November evening I waited, filled with impatience for his return. At last, shortly after 9 o'clock, there arrived a messenger with a note. Am dining at Goldini's restaurant, Gloucester Road, Kensington. Please come at once and join me there. Bring with you a jemmy, a dark lantern, a chisel, and a revolver. S.H. It was a nice equipment for a respectable citizen to carry through the dim, fog-draped streets. I stowed them all discreetly away in my overcoat and drove straight to the address given. There sat my friend at a little round table near the door of the garish Italian restaurant. Have you had something to eat? Then join me in a coffee and a curacao. Try one of the proprietor's cigars. They are less poisonous than one would expect. Have you the tools? They're here in my overcoat. Excellent. Let me give you a short sketch of what I have done, with some indication of what we are about to do. Now, it must be evident to you, Watson, that this young man's body was placed on the roof of the train. That was clear from the instant that I determined the fact that it was from the roof and not from a carriage that he had fallen. Could it not have been dropped from a bridge? I should say it was impossible. If you examine the roofs, you will find that they are slightly rounded, and there is no railing round them. Therefore, we can say for certain that young Cadogan West was placed on it. How could he be placed there? That was the question which we had to answer. There is only one possible way. You are aware that the underground runs clear of tunnels at some points in the West End.
Oh, fuck.
I had a vague memory that, as I have travelled by it, I have occasionally seen windows just above my head. Now suppose that a train halted under such a window. Would there be any difficulty in laying a body upon the roof? It seems most improbable. We must fall back upon the old axiom that when all other contingencies fail, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Here, all other contingencies have failed. When I found that the leading international agent, who had just left London, lived in a row of houses which abutted upon the underground, I was so pleased that you were a little astonished at my sudden frivolity. Oh, that was it, was it? Yes, that was it. Mr. Hugo Oberstein of 13 Caulfield Gardens had become my objective. I began my operations at Gloucester Road Station, where a very helpful official walked me along the track and allowed me to satisfy myself not only that the back stair windows of Caulfield Gardens open on the line, but the even more essential fact that, owing to the intersection of one of the larger railways, the underground trains are frequently held motionless for some minutes at that very spot. Splendid, Holmes. You've got it. So far, Watson. We advance, but the goal is afar. Well, having seen the back of Caulfield Gardens, I visited the front and satisfied myself that the bird was indeed flown. It is a considerable house, unfurnished, so far as I could judge, in the upper rooms. Oberstein lived there with a single valet, who was probably a confederate entirely in his confidence. We must bear in mind that Oberstein has gone to the continent to dispose of his booty, but not with any idea of flight, for he had no reason to fear a warrant, and the idea of an amateur domiciliary visit would certainly never occur to him. Yet that is precisely what we are about to make. Could we not get a warrant and legalize it? Hardly on the evidence. What can we hope to do? We cannot tell what correspondence may be there. I don't like it, Holmes. My dear fellow, you shall keep watch in the street. I'll do the criminal part. It's not a time to stick at trifles. Think of Mycroft's note, of the Admiralty, the Cabinet, the exalted person who waits for news. We are bound to go. My answer was to rise from the table. You are right, Holmes. We are bound to go. He sprang up and shook me by the hand. I knew you would not shrink at the last, said he. And for a moment I saw something in his eyes which was nearer to tenderness than I had ever seen.
Ooh.
The next instant he was his masterful, practical self once more. It is nearly half a mile, but there is no hurry. Let us walk, said he. Don't drop the instruments, I beg. Your arrest as a suspicious character would be a most unfortunate complication. Caulfield Gardens was one of those lines of flat-faced, pillared and porticoed houses which are so prominent a product of the middle Victorian epoch in the West End of London. Next door there appeared to be a children's party, with the merry buzz of young voices, and the clatter of a piano resounded through the night. The fog still hung about and screened us with its friendly shade. Holmes had lit his lantern and flashed it upon the massive door. This is a serious proposition, said he. It is certainly bolted as well as locked. We would do better in the area. There is an excellent archway down yonder, in case a too zealous policeman should intrude. Give me a hand, Watson, and I'll do the same for you. A minute later we were both in the area. Hardly had we reached the dark shadows, for the step of the policeman was heard in the fog above. As its soft rhythm died away, Holmes set to work upon the lower door. I saw him stoop and strain until, with a sharp crash, it flew open. We sprang through into the dark passage, closing the area door behind us. Holmes led the way up the curving, uncarpeted stair. His little fan of yellow light shone upon a low window. Here we are, Watson. This must be the one. He threw it open, and as he did so, there was a low, harsh murmur, growing steadily into a loud
Haven't broke anything
roar
with that
as
yet.
a train dashed past us in the darkness.
Ooh.
Holmes
Yeah,
swept
right
his
off.
light along the windowsill. It was thickly coated with soot from the passing air. The surface was blurred and rubbed in places. You can see where they rested the body. Hello, Watson, what is this? There can be no doubt that it is a blood mark. He was pointing to faint discolorations along the woodwork of the window. Here it is on the stone of the stair also. This demonstration is complete. Let us stay here until a train stops. We had not long to wait. The very next train roared from the tunnel as before, but slowed in the open, and then, with a creaking of brakes, pulled up immediately beneath us. It was not 4 feet from the window ledge to the roof of the carriages. Holmes softly closed the window. So far we are justified, said he. What do you think of it, Watson? A masterpiece. You have never risen to a greater height. I cannot agree with you there. From the moment that I conceived the idea of the body being upon the roof, which surely was not a very abstruse one, all the rest was inevitable, if it were not for the grave interests involved. The affair up to this point would be insignificant. Our difficulties are still before us, but perhaps we may find something here which may help us. We had ascended the kitchen stair and entered the suite of rooms upon the first floor. One was a dining room, severely furnished, and containing nothing of interest. The second was a bedroom, which also drew blank. The remaining rooms appeared more promising, and my companion settled down to a systematic examination. It was littered with books and papers, and was evidently used as a study. Swiftly and methodically, Holmes turned over the contents of drawer after drawer and cupboard after cupboard. But no gleam of success came to brighten his austere face. At the end of an hour, he was no further than when he started. The cunning dog has covered his tracks, said he. He has left nothing to incriminate him. His dangerous correspondence has been destroyed or removed. This is our last chance. It was a small tin cash box which stood upon the writing desk. Holmes pried it open with his chisel. Several rolls of paper were within, covered with figures and calculations, without any note to show to what they referred. The recurring words, water pressure and pressure to the square inch, suggested some possible relation to a submarine. Holmes tossed them all impatiently aside. There only remained an envelope with some small newspaper slips inside it. He shook them out on the table, and at once I saw by his eager face that his hopes had been raised. What's this, Watson, eh? What's this? Record of a series of messages in the advertisements of a paper. Daily Telegraph agony column by the print and paper. Right-hand top corner of a page. No dates, but messages arranged themselves. This must be the first. Hoped to hear sooner. Terms agreed to. Write fully to address given on card. Pierrot. Next comes, too complex for description, must have full report, stuff awaits you when goods delivered. Pierrot. Then comes, matter presses, must withdraw offer unless contract completed, make appointment by letter, will confirm by advertisement. Pierrot. Finally, Monday night after 9, 2 taps, only ourselves, do not be so suspicious, payment in hard cash when goods delivered. Pierrot. A fairly complete record, Watson. If we could only get at the man at the other end. He sat lost in thought, tapping his fingers on the table. Finally, he sprang to his feet. Well, perhaps it won't be so difficult after all. There is nothing more to be done here, Watson. I think we might drive round to the offices of the Daily Telegraph, and so bring a good day's work to a conclusion. Mycroft, Holmes and Lestrade had come round by appointment after breakfast next day, and Sherlock Holmes had recounted to them our proceedings of the day before. The professional shook his head over our confessed burglary. "We can't do these things in the force, Mr. Holmes," said he. "No wonder you get results that are beyond us. But some of these days you'll go too far, and you'll find yourself and your friend in trouble. For England, home and beauty, eh, Watson? Martyrs on the altar of our country. But what do you think of it, Mycroft? Excellent, Sherlock, admirable. But what use will you make of it?" Holmes picked up the Daily Telegraph, which lay upon the table. "Have you seen Pierrot's advertisement today?" "What, another one?" "Yes, here it is. Tonight, same hour, same place, 2 taps. Most vitally important, your own safety at stake, Pierrot." "By George," cried Lestrade. "If he answers that, we've got him." "That was my idea when I put it in. I think if you could both make it convenient to come with us about 8 o'clock to Caulfield Gardens, we might possibly get a little nearer to a solution." One of the most remarkable characteristics of Sherlock Holmes was his power of throwing his brain out of action and switching all his thoughts onto lighter things whenever he had convinced himself that he could no longer work to advantage. I remember that during the whole of that memorable day he lost himself in a monograph which he had undertaken upon the polyphonic motets of Lassus. For my own part, I had none of this power of detachment, and the day in consequence appeared to be interminable. The great national importance of the issue, the suspense in high quarters, the direct nature of the experiment which we were trying, all combined to work upon my nerve. It was a relief to me when at last, after a light dinner, we set out upon our expedition. Lestrade and Mycroft met us by appointment at the outside of Gloucester Road Station. The area door of Oberstein's house had been left open the night before, and it was necessary for me, as Mycroft Holmes absolutely and indignantly declined to climb the railings, to pass in and open the hall door. By 9 o'clock we were all seated in the study, waiting patiently for our man. An hour passed, and yet another. When 11 struck, the measured beat of the great church clock seemed to sound the dirge of our hopes. Lestrade and Mycroft were fidgeting in their seats and looking twice a minute at their watches. Holmes sat silent and composed, his eyelids half shut, but every sense on the alert. He raised his head with a sudden jerk. "He is coming," said he. There had been a furtive step past the door. Now it returned. We heard a shuffling sound outside, and then 2 sharp taps with the knocker. Holmes rose, motioning us to remain seated. The gas in the hall was a mere point of light. He opened the outer door, and then, as a dark figure slipped past him, he closed and fastened it. "This way," we heard him say, and a moment later our man stood before us. Holmes had followed him closely, and as the man turned, with a cry of surprise and alarm, he caught him by the collar and threw him back into the room. Before our prisoner had recovered his balance, the door was shut, and Holmes standing with his back against it. The man glared round him, staggered, and fell senseless upon the floor. With the shock, his broad-brimmed hat flew from his head, his cravat slipped down from his lips, and there were the long, light beard and the soft, handsome, delicate features of Colonel Valentine Walter. Holmes gave a whistle of surprise. "You can write me down an ass this time, Watson," said he. "This was not the bird that I was looking for." "Who is he?" asked Mycroft eagerly. "The younger brother of the late Sir James Walter, the head of the submarine department." Yes, I see the fall of the cards. He is coming too. I think that you had best leave his examination to me." We had carried the prostrate body to the sofa. Now our prisoner sat up, looked round him with a horror-stricken face, and passed his hand over his forehead, like one who cannot believe his own senses. "What is this?" he asked. "I came here to visit Mr. Oberstein." "Everything is known, Colonel Walter," said Holmes. "How an Englishman could behave in such a manner is beyond my comprehension, but your whole correspondence and relations with Oberstein are within our knowledge. So also are the circumstances connected with the death of young Cadogan West." The man groaned and sank his face in his hands. We waited, but he was silent. "I can assure you," said Holmes, "that every essential is already known. We know that you were pressed for money, that you took an impress of the keys which your brother held, and that you entered into a correspondence with Oberstein, who answered your letters through the advertisement columns of the Daily Telegraph. We are aware that you went down to the office in the fog on Monday night, but that you were seen and followed by young Cadogan West, who had probably some previous reason to suspect you. He saw your theft, but could not give the alarm, as it was just possible that you were taking the papers to your brother in London. Leaving all his private concerns, like the good citizen that he was, he followed you closely in the fog and kept at your heels until you reached this very house. There he intervened. And then it was, Colonel Walter, that to treason you added the more terrible crime of murder." I did not. Before God, I swear that I did not," cried our wretched prisoner. "Tell us, then, how Cadogan West met his end before you laid him upon the roof of a railway carriage." "I will. I swear to you that I will. I did the rest. I confess it. It was just as you say. A stock exchange debt had to be paid. I needed the money badly. Oberstein offered me 5,000. It was to save myself from ruin. But as to murder, I am as innocent as you. What happened then?" "He had his suspicions before, and he followed me as you describe. I never knew it until I was at the very door. It was thick fog, and one could not see 3 yards. I had given 2 taps, and Oberstein had come to the door. The young man rushed up and demanded to know what we were about to do with the papers. Oberstein had a short life-preserver, and he always carried it with him. As West forced his way after us into the house, Oberstein struck him on the head." The blow was a fatal one. He was dead within 5 minutes. There he lay in the hall, and we were at our wits' end what to do. Then Oberstein had this idea about the trains which halted under his back window. At first he examined the papers which I had brought. He said that 3 of them were essential and that he must keep them. You cannot keep them, said I. There will be a dreadful row at Woolwich if they are not returned. I must keep them, said he, for they are so technical that it is impossible in the time to make copies. Then they must all go back together tonight, said I. He thought for a little, and then he cried out that he had it. 3 I will keep, said he. The others we will stuff into the pocket of this young man. When he is found, the whole business will assuredly be put to his account. I could see no other way out of it. So we did as he suggested. We waited half an hour at the window before a train stopped. It was so thick that nothing could be seen, and we had no difficulty in lowering West's body onto the train. That was the end of the matter, so far as I was concerned. And your brother? He said nothing, but he had caught me once with his keys, and I think that he suspected. I read in his eyes that he suspected. As you know, he never held up his head again. There was silence in the room. It was broken by Mycroft Holmes. Can you not make reparation? It would ease your conscience, and possibly your punishment. What reparation can I make? Where is Oberstein with the papers? I do not know. Did he give you no address? He said that letters to the Hôtel du Louvre, Paris, would eventually reach him. Then reparation is still within your power, said Sherlock Holmes. I will do anything I can. I owe this fellow no particular goodwill. He has been my ruin and my downfall. Here are paper and pen. Sit at this desk and write to my dictation. Direct the envelope to the address given. That is right. Now the letter. Dear Sir, with regard to our transaction, you will no doubt have observed by now that one essential detail is missing. I have a tracing which will make it complete. This has involved me in extra trouble, however, and I must ask you for a further advance of £500. I will not trust it to the post, nor will I take anything but gold or notes. I would come to you abroad, but it would excite remark if I left the country at present. Therefore, I shall expect to meet you in the smoking room of the Charing Cross Hotel at noon on Saturday. Remember that only English notes or gold will be taken. That will do very well. I shall be very much surprised if it does not fetch our man. And it did. It is a matter of history. That secret history of a nation which is often so much more intimate and interesting than its public chronicles, that Oberstein, eager to complete the coup of his lifetime, came to the lure and was safely engulfed for 15 years in a British prison. In his trunk were found the invaluable Bruce Partington plans, which he had put up for auction in all the naval centres of Europe. Colonel Walter died in prison towards the end of the second year of his sentence. As to Holmes, he returned refreshed to his monograph upon the polyphonic motets of Lassus, which has since been printed for private circulation, and is said by experts to be the last word upon the subject. Some weeks afterwards, I learned incidentally that my friend spent a day at Windsor, whence he returned with a remarkably fine emerald tie-pin. When I asked him if he had bought it, he answered that it was a present from a certain gracious lady in whose interests he had once been fortunate enough to carry out a small commission. He said no more, but I fancied that I could guess at that lady's august name. And I have little doubt that the emerald pin will forever recall to my friend's memory the adventure of the Bruce Partington plans. That is the end of The Adventure of the Bruce Partington Plans by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, read by Greg Wagland.
You're starting to get
Audio
repetitive.
2019. All rights reserved.
They're starting to sound repetitive, like Goosebump novels, where they're just the same thing rewatched.
Skincare lives here. Shop now at Shoppers Drug Mart.
The Adventure of the Priory School. We have had some dramatic entrances and exits upon our small stage at Baker Street, but I cannot recollect anything more sudden and startling than the first appearance of Thornycroft Huxtable, M.A., Ph.D., etc. His card, which seemed too small to carry the weight of his academic distinctions, preceded him by a few seconds, and then he entered himself, so large, so pompous, and so dignified that he was the very embodiment of self-possession and solidity. And yet his first action, when the door had closed behind him, was to stagger against the table, whence he slipped down upon the floor, and there was that majestic figure prostrate and insensible upon our bearskin hearthrug. We had sprung to our feet, and for a few moments we stared in silent amazement at this ponderous piece of wreckage, which told of some sudden and fatal storm far out on the ocean of life. Then Holmes hurried with a cushion for his head, and I with brandy for his lips. The heavy white face was seamed with lines of trouble. The hanging pouches under the closed eyes were leaden in colour. The loose mouth drooped dolorously at the corners. The rolling chins were unshaven. Collar and shirt bore the grime of the long journey, and the hair bristled unkempt from the well-shaped head. It was a sorely stricken man who lay before us. "What is it, Watson?" asked Holmes.
Okay,
"Absolute exhaustion. Possibly mere hunger and fatigue," said I, with my finger
Some
on the
pot.
thready pulse, where the stream of life trickled thin and small. "Return ticket from Mackleton in the north of England," said Holmes, drawing it from the watch pocket. "It is not 12 o'clock yet. He has certainly been an early starter." The puckered eyelids had begun to quiver, and now a pair of vacant grey eyes looked up at us. An instant later the man had scrambled onto his feet, his face crimson with shame. "Forgive this weakness, Mr. Holmes. I've been a little overwrought. Thank you. If I might have a glass of milk and a biscuit, I have no doubt that I should be better. I came personally, Mr. Holmes, in order to ensure that you would return with me. I feared that no telegram would convince you of the absolute urgency of the case. When you are quite restored, I am quite well again. I cannot imagine how I came to be so weak. I wish you, Mr. Holmes, to come to Mackleton with me by the next train." My friend shook his head. "My colleague, Dr. Watson, could tell you that we are very busy at present. I am retained in this case of the Ferrers documents, and the Abergavenny murder is coming up for trial. Only a very important issue could call me from London at present." "Important?" Our visitor threw up his hands. "Have you heard nothing of the abduction of the only son of the Duke of Holderness?" "What? The late cabinet minister?" "Exactly. We had tried to keep it out of the papers, but there was some rumour in the Globe last night. I thought it might have reached your ears." Holmes shot out his long, thin arm and picked out volume H in his encyclopedia of reference. "Holderness, 6th Duke, KG, PC, half the alphabet, Baron Beverley, Earl of Carston. Dear me, what a list. Lord Lieutenant of Hallamshire since 1900. Married Edith, daughter of Sir Charles Appledore, 1888. Heir and only child, Lord Saltire. Owns about 250,000 acres. Minerals in Lancashire and Wales. Address, Carlton House Terrace, Holderness Hall, Hallamshire. Carston Castle, Bangor, Wales. Lord of the Admiralty, 1872. Chief Secretary of State for... Well, this man is certainly one of the greatest subjects of the crown. The greatest and perhaps the wealthiest. I'm aware, Mr. Holmes, that you take a very high line in professional matters, and that you are prepared to work for the work's sake. I may tell you, however, that His Grace has already intimated that a cheque for £5,000 will be handed over to the person who could tell him where his son is, and another 1,000 to him who can name the man or men who have taken him.
The son ran away to be with the lover.
Offer, said Holmes. Watson, I think that we shall accompany Dr. Huxtable back to the north of England. And now, Dr. Huxtable, when you have consumed that milk, you will kindly tell me what has happened, when it happened, how it happened, and finally, what Dr. Thornycroft Huxtable of the Priory School near Mackleton has to do with the matter, and why he comes 3 days after an event, the state of your chin gives the date, to ask for my humble services. Our visitor had consumed his milk and biscuits. The light had come back to his eyes and the colour to his cheeks, as he set himself with great vigour and lucidity to explain the situation. I must inform you, gentlemen, that the Priory is a preparatory school, of which I am the founder and principal. Huxtable's sidelights on Horace may possibly recall my name to your memories. The Priory is, without exception, the best and most select preparatory school in England. Lord Leverstoke, the Earl of Blackwater, Sir Cathcart Soames, they all have entrusted their sons to me. But I felt that my school had reached its zenith when, weeks ago, the Duke of Holderness sent Mr. James Wilder, his secretary, with intimation that young Lord Saltire, 10 years old, his only son and heir,
never mind.
was about to be
Didn't run off
committed
with
to
his
my
lover.
charge. Little did I think that this would be the prelude to the most crushing misfortune of my life. On May the 1st, the boy arrived, that being the beginning of the summer term. He was a charming youth, and he soon fell into our ways. I may tell you, I trust that I am not indiscreet, but half-confidences are absurd in such a case, that he was not entirely happy at home. It is an open secret that the Duke's married life had not been a peaceful one, and the matter had ended in a separation by mutual consent, the Duchess taking up her residence in the south of France. This had occurred very shortly before, and the boy's sympathies are known to have been strongly with his mother. He moped after her departure from Holderness Hall, and it was for this reason that the Duke desired to send him to my establishment. In a fortnight, the boy was quite at home with us, and was apparently absolutely happy. He was last seen on the night of May the 13th, that is, the night of last Monday. His room was on the second floor, and was approached through another larger room in which 2 boys were sleeping. These boys saw and heard nothing, so that it is certain that young Saltire did not pass out that way. His window was open, and there is a stout ivy plant leading to the ground. We could trace no footmarks below, but it is sure that this is the only possible exit. His absence was discovered at 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning. His bed had been slept in. He had dressed himself fully before going off in his usual school suit of black Eton jacket and dark grey trousers. There were no signs that anyone had entered the room, and it is quite certain that anything in the nature of cries or a struggle would have been heard, since Corter, the elder boy in the inner room, is a very light sleeper. When Lord Saltire's disappearance was discovered, I at once called a roll of the whole establishment, boys, masters and servants. It was then that we ascertained that Lord Saltire had not been alone in his flight. Heidegger, the German master, was missing. His room was on the second floor, at the farther end of the building, facing the same way as Lord Saltire's. His bed had also been slept in, but he had apparently gone away partly dressed, since his shirt and socks were lying on the floor. He had undoubtedly let himself down by the ivy, for we could see the marks of his feet where he had landed on the lawn. His bicycle was kept in a small shed beside this lawn, and it also was gone. He had been with me for 2 years and came with the best references, but he was a silent, morose man, not very popular either with masters or boys. No trace could be found of the fugitives, and now, on Thursday morning, we are as ignorant as we were on Tuesday. Inquiry was, of course, made at once at Holderness Hall. It is only a few miles away, and we imagined that, in some sudden attack of homesickness, he had gone back to his father. But nothing had been heard of him. The Duke is greatly agitated. And as to me, you have seen yourselves the state of nervous prostration, to which the suspense and the responsibility have reduced me. Mr. Holmes, if ever you put forward your full powers, I implore you to do so now. For never in your life could you have a case which is more worthy of them. Sherlock Holmes had listened with the utmost intentness to the statement of the unhappy schoolmaster. His drawn brows and the deep furrow between them showed that he needed no exhortation to concentrate all his attention upon a problem which, apart from the tremendous interest involved, must appeal so directly to his love of the complex and the unusual. He now drew out his notebook and jotted down one or two memoranda. "You have been very remiss in not coming to me sooner," said he severely. "You start me on my investigation with a very serious handicap. It is inconceivable, for example, that this ivy and this lawn would have yielded nothing to an expert observer. I am not to blame, Mr. Holmes. His Grace was extremely desirous to avoid all public scandal. He was afraid of his family unhappiness being dragged before the world. He has a deep horror of anything of the kind. But there has been some official investigation. Yes, sir, and it has proved most disappointing. An apparent clue was at once obtained, since a boy and a young man were reported to have been seen leaving a neighbouring station by an early train. Only last night we had news that the couple had been hunted down in Liverpool, and they proved to have no connection whatever with the matter in hand. Then it was that, in my despair and disappointment, after a sleepless night, I came straight to you by the early train. I suppose the local investigation was relaxed while this false clue was being followed up. It was entirely dropped, so that 3 days have been wasted. The affair has been most deplorably handled. I feel it and admit it. And yet the problem should be capable of ultimate solution. I shall be very happy to look into it. Have you been able to trace any connection between the missing boy and this German master? None at all. Was he in the master's class? No, he never exchanged a word with him, so far as I know. That is certainly very singular. Had the boy a bicycle? No. Was any other bicycle missing? No. Is that certain? Quite. Well now, you do not mean to seriously suggest that this German rode off upon a bicycle in the dead of night, bearing the boy in his arms? Certainly not. Then what is the theory in your mind? The bicycle may have been a blind. It may have been hidden somewhere, and the pair gone off on foot. Quite so. But it seems rather an absurd blind, does it not? Were there other bicycles in this shed? Several. Would he not have hidden a couple, had he desired to give the idea that they had gone off upon them? I suppose he would. Of course he would. The blind theory won't do. But the incident is an admirable starting point for an investigation. After all, a bicycle is not an easy thing to conceal or to destroy. One other question. Did anyone call to see the boy on the day before he disappeared? No. Did he get any letters? Yes, one letter. From whom? From his father. Do you open the boy's letters? No. How do you know it was from the father? The coat of arms was on the envelope, and it was addressed in the Duke's peculiar stiff hand. Besides, the Duke remembers having written. When had he a letter before that? Not for several days. Had he ever one from France? No, never. You see the point of my questions, of course. Either the boy was carried off by force, or he went of his own free will. In the latter case, you would expect that some prompting from outside would be needed to make so young a lad do such a thing. If he has had no visitors, that prompting must have come in letters. Hence, I try to find out who were his correspondents. I fear I cannot help you much. His only correspondent, so far as I know, was his own father, who wrote to him on the very day of his disappearance. Were the relations between father and son very friendly?
No.
His Grace is never very friendly with anyone. He is completely immersed in large public questions, and is rather inaccessible to all ordinary emotions. He was always kind to the boy in his own way, but the sympathies of the latter were with the mother. Yes. Did he say so? No.
Damn it.
The Duke
I
then?
hate these things.
Good heavens, no. Then how could you know? I've had some confidential talks with Mr. James Wilder, His Grace's secretary. It was he who gave me the information about Lord Saltire's feelings. I see. By the way, that last letter of the Duke's, was it found in the boy's room after he was gone? No, he had taken it with him, I think. Mr. Holmes, it is time that we were leaving for Euston. I will order a four-wheeler. In a quarter of an hour, we shall be at your service. If you are telegraphing home, Mr. Huxtable, it would be well to allow the people in your neighbourhood to imagine that the inquiry is still going on in Liverpool, or wherever else that red herring led your pack. In the meantime, I will do a little quiet work at your own doors. And perhaps the scent is not so cold, but the two old hounds, like Watson and myself, may get a sniff of it. That evening found us in the cold, bracing atmosphere of the Peak Country, in which Dr. Huxtable's famous school is situated. It was already dark when we reached it. A card was lying on the hall table, and the butler whispered something to his master, who turned to us with agitation in every heavy feature. "The Duke is here," said he. "The Duke and Mr. Wilder are in the study. Come, gentlemen, and I will introduce you." I was, of course, familiar with the pictures of the famous statesman, but the man himself was very different from his representation. He was a tall and stately person, scrupulously dressed, with a drawn, thin face, and a nose which was grotesquely curved and long. His complexion was of a dead pallor, which was more startling by contrast with a long, dwindling beard of vivid red, which flowed down over his white waistcoat, with his watch chain gleaming through its fringe. Such was the stately presence who looked stonily at us from the centre of Dr. Huxtable's hearthrug. Beside him stood a very young man, whom I understood to be Wilder, the private secretary. He was small, nervous, alert, with intelligent light blue eyes and mobile features. It was he who at once, in an incisive and positive tone, opened the conversation. "I called this morning, Dr. Huxtable, too late to prevent you from starting for London. I learned that your object was to invite Mr. Sherlock Holmes to undertake the conduct of this case. His Grace is surprised, Dr. Huxtable, that you should have taken such a step without consulting him. When I learned that the police had failed, His Grace is by no means convinced that the police have failed. But surely, Mr. Wilder, you are well aware, Dr. Huxtable, that His Grace is particularly anxious to avoid all public scandal. He prefers to take as few people as possible into his confidence. The matter can be easily remedied," said the browbeaten doctor. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes can return to London by the morning train." "Hardly that, Doctor, hardly that," said Holmes in his blandest voice. "This northern air is invigorating and pleasant, so I propose to spend a few days upon your moors and to occupy my mind as best I may. Whether I have the shelter of your roof or of the village inn is, of course, for you to decide." I could see that the unfortunate doctor was in the last stage of indecision, from which he was rescued by the deep, sonorous voice of the red-bearded Duke, which boomed out like a dinner gong. "I agree with Mr. Wilder, Dr. Huxtable, that you would have done wisely to consult me, but since Mr. Holmes has already been taken into your confidence, it would indeed be absurd that we should not avail ourselves of his services. Far from going to the inn, Mr. Holmes, I should be pleased if you would come and stay with me at Holderness Hall." "I thank your Grace. For the purposes of my investigation, I think that it would be wiser for me to remain at the scene of the mystery." "Just as you like, Mr. Holmes. Any information which Mr. Wilder or I can give you is, of course, at your disposal." "It will probably be necessary for me to see you at the hall," said Holmes. "I would only ask you now, sir, whether you have formed any explanation in your own mind as to the mysterious disappearance of your son." "No, sir, I have not." "Excuse me if I allude to that which is painful to you, but I have no alternative. Do you think that the Duchess had anything to do with the matter?" The great minister showed perceptible hesitation. "I do not think so," he said at last. "The other most obvious explanation is that the child has been kidnapped for the purpose of levying ransom. You have not had any demand of the sort?" "No, sir." "One more question, Your Grace. I understand that you wrote to your son upon the day when this incident occurred." "No, I wrote upon the day before." "Exactly, but he received it on that day?" "Yes." "Was there anything in your letter which might have unbalanced him, or induced him to take such a step?" "No, sir, certainly not." "Did you post that letter yourself?" The nobleman's reply was interrupted by his secretary, who broke in with some heat. "His Grace is not in the habit of posting letters himself," said he. "This letter was laid with others upon the study table, and I myself put them in the post bag." "You are sure this one was among them?" "Yes, I observed it." "How many letters did your Grace write that day?" 20 or 30. I have a large correspondence, but surely this is somewhat irrelevant." "Not entirely," said Holmes. "For my own part," said the Duke, "I have advised the police to turn their attention to the south of France. I have already said that I do not believe that the Duchess would encourage so monstrous an action, that the lad had the most wrong-headed opinions, and it is possible that he may have fled to her, aided and abetted by this German. I think, Dr. Huxtable, that we will now return to the hall." I could see that there were other questions which Holmes would have wished to put, but the nobleman's abrupt manner showed that the interview was at an end. It was evident that to his intensely aristocratic nature, this discussion of his intimate family affairs with a stranger was most abhorrent, and that he feared lest every fresh question would throw a fiercer light into the discreetly shadowed corners of his ducal history. When the nobleman and his secretary had left, my friend flung himself at once with characteristic eagerness into the investigation. The boy's chamber was carefully examined, and yielded nothing save the absolute conviction that it was only through the window that he could have escaped. The German master's room and effects gave no further clue. In his case, a trailer of ivy had given way under his weight, and we saw by the light of a lantern the mark on the lawn where his heels had come down. That one dint in the short green grass was the only material witness left of this inexplicable nocturnal flight. Sherlock Holmes left the house alone, and only returned after 11. He had obtained a large ordnance map of the neighborhood, and this he brought into my room, where he laid it out on the bed, and having balanced the lamp in the middle of it, he began to smoke over it, and occasionally to point out objects of interest with the reeking amber of his pipe. "This case grows upon me, Watson," said he. "There are decidedly some points of interest in connection with it. In this early stage, I want you to realize those geographical features which may have a good deal to do with our investigation. Look at this map. This dark square is the Priory School.
Hello.
I'll put a pin in it. Now this line is the main road.
Just
You
butchering
see that it runs
some
east and west past the
vintage
school.
collectible Beanie Babies.
And you see also that there is no side road for a mile either way. If these two folk passed away by road, it was this road. Exactly. By a singular and happy chance, we are able, to some extent, to check what passed along this road during the night in question. At this point, where my pipe is now resting, a county constable was on duty from 12 to 6. It is, as you perceive, the first crossroad on the east side. This man declares that he was not absent from his post for an instant, and he is positive that neither boy nor man could have gone that way unseen. I have spoken with this policeman tonight, and he appears to me to be a perfectly reliable person. That blocks this end. We have now to deal with the other. There is an inn here, the Red Bull, the landlady of which was ill. She had sent to Mackleton for a doctor, but he did not arrive until morning, being absent at another case. The people at the inn were alert all night, awaiting his coming, and one or other of them seems to have continually had an eye upon the road. They declare that no one passed. If their evidence is good, then we are fortunate enough to be able to block the west, and also to be able to say that the fugitives did not use the road at all. But the bicycle, I objected. Quite so. We will come to the bicycle presently. To continue our reasoning, if these people did not go by the road, they must have traversed the country to the north of the house, or to the south of the house, that is certain. Let us weigh the one against the other. On the south of the house is, as you perceive, a large district of arable land cut up into small fields, with stone walls between them. There, I admit that a bicycle is impossible. We can dismiss the idea. We turn to the country on the north. Here there lies a grove of trees marked as the Ragged Shaw, and on the farther side stretches a great rolling moor, Lower Gilmore, extending for 10 miles and sloping gradually upward. Here, at one side of this wilderness, is Holderness Hall, 10 miles by road, but only 6 across the moor. It is a peculiarly desolate plain. A few moor farmers have small holdings where they rear sheep and cattle. Except these, the plover and the curlew are the only inhabitants until you come to the Chesterfield high road. There is a church there, you see, a few cottages, and an inn. Beyond that, the hills become precipitous.
Okay.
Surely it is here to the north that our quest must lie. But the bicycle, I persisted. Well, well, said Holmes impatiently. A good cyclist does not need a high road. The moor is intersected with paths, and the moon was at the full. Hello, what is this? There was an agitated knock at the door, and an instant afterwards Dr. Huxtable was in the room. In his hand he held a blue cricket cap with a white chevron on the peak. At last we have a clue, he cried. Thank heaven. At last we are on the dear boy's track. It is his cap. Where was it found? In the van of the gypsies who camped on the moor. They left on Tuesday. Today the police traced them down and examined their caravan. This was found. How do they account for it? They shuffled and lied, said that they found it on the moor on Tuesday morning. They know where he is, the rascals. Thank goodness, they're all safe under lock and key. Either the fear of the law or the Duke's purse will certainly get out of them all that they know. So far so good, said Holmes, when the doctor had at last left the room. It at least bears out the theory that it is on the side of the Lower Gilmore that we must hope for results. The police have really done nothing locally, save the arrest of these gypsies. Look here, Watson, there is a watercourse across the moor. You see it marked here in the map. In some parts, it widens into a morass. This is particularly so in the region between Holderness Hall and school. It is vain to look elsewhere for tracks in this dry weather, but at that point, there is certainly a chance of some record being left. I will call you early tomorrow morning, and you and I will try if we can throw some little light upon the mystery. The day was just breaking when I woke to find the long, thin form of Holmes by my bedside. He was fully dressed and had apparently already been out. I have done the lawn and the bicycle shed, said he. I have also had a rumble through the Ragged Shaw. Now, Watson, there is cocoa ready in the next room.
Ooh.
I must beg you to hurry, for we have a great day before us. His eyes shone, and his cheek was flushed with the exhilaration of the master workman who sees his work lie ready before him. A very different Holmes, this active, alert man, from the introspective and pallid dreamer of Baker Street. I felt, as I looked upon that supple figure, alive with nervous energy, that it was indeed a strenuous day that awaited us. And yet it opened in the blackest disappointment. With high hopes we struck across the P.T. Russet Moor, intersected with 1,000 sheep paths, until we came to the broad, light green belt which marked the morass between us and Holderness. Certainly, if the lad had gone homeward, he must have passed this, and he could not pass it without leaving his traces.
Too many coils.
But no sign of him or the German could be seen. With a darkening face, my friend strode along the margin, eagerly observant of every muddy stain
there it
on
is.
the mossy surface. Sheep marks there were in profusion, and at one place, some miles down, cows had left their tracks. Nothing more. Check number 1, said Holmes, looking gloomily over the rolling expanse of the moor. There is another morass down yonder, and a narrow neck between. Hello, hello, what have we here? We had come on a small black ribbon of pathway. In the middle of it, clearly marked on the sodden soil, was the track of a bicycle. Hurrah, I cried, we have it. But Holmes was shaking his head, and his face was puzzled and expectant rather than joyous. A bicycle, certainly, but not the bicycle, said he. I am familiar with 42 different impressions left by tires. This, as you perceive, is a Dunlop, with a patch upon the outer cover. Heidegger's tires were Palmer's, leaving longitudinal stripes. Abeling, the mathematical master, was sure upon the point.
Little bit, yep.
Therefore, it is not Heidegger's track.
I'm sewing up some Beanie Babies tonight.
Possibly, if we could prove a bicycle to have been in
Yeah,
his
making
possession.
those two-headed monsters.
But this we have utterly failed to do. This track,
Always.
as you perceive, was made by a rider who was going from the direction of the school.
Oh, yes.
Or towards it. No, my dear
Alright,
Watson.
sleep tight.
The more deeply sunk impression
Night, night,
is,
love
of
you
course,
too.
the hind wheel, upon which the weight rests.
Mummy.
You perceive several places where it has passed across and obliterated the more shallow mark of the front one. It was undoubtedly heading away from the school. It may or may not be connected with our inquiry, but we will follow it backwards before we go any farther. We did so, and at the end of a few hundred yards lost the tracks as we emerged from the boggy portion of the moor. Following the path backwards, we picked out another spot where a spring trickled across it. Here, once again, was the mark of the bicycle, though nearly obliterated by the hoofs of cows. After that, there was no sign, but the path ran right on into Ragged Shaw, the wood which backed onto the school. From this wood, the cycle must have emerged. Holmes sat down on a boulder and rested his chin in his hands. I had smoked 2 cigarettes before he moved. Well, said he at last. It is, of course, possible that a cunning man might change the tires of his bicycle in order to leave unfamiliar tracks. A criminal who was capable of such a thought is a man whom I should be proud to do business with. We will leave this question undecided and hark back to our morass again, for we have left a good deal unexplored. We continued our systematic survey of the edge of the sodden portion of the moor, and soon our perseverance was gloriously rewarded. Right across the lower part of the bog lay a miry path. Holmes gave a cry of delight as he approached it. An impression like a fine bundle of telegraph wires ran down the center of it. It was the Palmer tires. Here is Herr Heidegger, sure enough, cried Holmes exultantly. My reasoning seems to have been pretty sound, Watson. I congratulate you. But we have a long way still to go. Kindly walk clear of the path. Now let us follow the trail. I fear that it will not lead very far. We found, however, as we advanced, that this portion of the moor is intersected with soft patches, and though we frequently lost sight of the track, we always succeeded in picking it up once more. Do you observe, said Holmes, that the rider is now undoubtedly forcing the pace? There can be no doubt of it. Look at this impression, where you get both tires clear. The one is as deep as the other. That can only mean that the rider is throwing his weight onto the handlebar, as a man does when he is sprinting. By Jove, he has had a fall. There was a broad, irregular smudge covering some yards of the track. Then there were a few footmarks, and the tire reappeared once more. A side slip, I suggested. Holmes held up a crumpled branch of flowering gorse. To my horror, I perceived that the yellow blossoms were all dabbled with crimson. On the path, too, and among the heather, were dark stains of clotted blood. Bad, said Holmes. Bad. Stand clear, Watson. Not an unnecessary footstep. What do I read here? He fell, wounded. He stood up. He remounted. He proceeded. But there is no other track. Cattle on this side path. He was surely not gored by a bull. Impossible. But I see no traces of anyone else. We must push on, Watson. Surely with stains as well as the track to guide us. He cannot escape us now. Our search was not a very long one. The tracks of the tire began to curve fantastically upon the wet and shining path. Suddenly, as I looked ahead, the gleam of metal caught my eye from amid the thick gorse bushes. Out of them we dragged a bicycle, armor-tired. One pedal bent, and the whole front of it horribly smeared and slobbered with blood. On the other side of the bushes, a shoe was projecting. We ran round, and there lay the unfortunate rider. He was a tall man, full-bearded, with spectacles, one glass of which had been knocked out. The cause of his death was a frightful blow upon the head, which had crushed in part of his skull. That he could have gone on after receiving such an injury said much for the vitality and courage of the man. He wore shoes but no socks, and his open coat disclosed a nightshirt beneath it. It was undoubtedly the German master. Holmes turned the body over reverently and examined it with great attention. He then sat in deep thought for a time, and I could see by his ruffled brow that this grim discovery had not, in his opinion, advanced us much in our inquiry. "It is difficult to know what to do, Watson," said he at last. "My own inclinations are to push this inquiry on, for we have already lost so much time that we cannot afford to waste another hour. On the other hand, we are bound to inform the police of the discovery, and to see that this poor fellow's body is looked after. I could take a note back, but I need your company and assistance. Wait a bit. There is a fellow cutting peat up yonder. Bring him over here, and he will guide the police." I brought the peasant across, and Holmes dispatched the frightened man with a note to Dr. Huxtable. "Now, Watson," said he, "we have picked up 2 clues this morning. One is the bicycle with the palmer tire, and we see what that has led to. The other is the bicycle with the patched Dunlop. Before we start to investigate that, let us try to realize what we do know, so as to make the most of it, and to separate the essential from the accidental. First of all, I wish to impress upon you that the boy certainly left of his own free will. He got down from his window and he went off, either alone or with someone, that is sure." I assented. "Well now, let us turn to this unfortunate German master. The boy was fully dressed when he fled. Therefore he forswore what he would do. But the German went without his socks. He certainly acted on very short notice. Undoubtedly. Why did he go? Because from his bedroom window he saw the flight of the boy. Because he wished to overtake him and bring him back. He seized his bicycle, pursued the lad, and in pursuing him met his death. So it would seem. Now I come to the critical part of my argument. The natural action of a man in pursuing a little boy would be to run after him. He would know that he could overtake him. But the German does not do so. He turns to his bicycle. I am told that he was an excellent cyclist. He would not do this if he did not see that the boy had some swift means of escape. The other bicycle. Let us continue our reconstruction. He meets his death 5 miles from the school, not by a bullet, mark you, which even a lad might conceivably discharge, but by a savage blow dealt by a vigorous arm. The lad then had a companion in his flight, and the flight was a swift one, since it took 5 miles before an expert cyclist could overtake them. Yet we survey the ground round the scene of the tragedy. What do we find? A few cattle tracks, nothing more. I took a wide sweep round, and there is no path within 50 yards. Another cyclist could have had nothing to do with the actual murder, nor were there any human footmarks. Holmes, I cried, this is impossible. Admirable, he said. A most illuminating remark. It is impossible, as I stated. And therefore I must, in some respect, have stated it wrong. Yet you saw for yourself. Can you suggest any fallacy? He could not have fractured his skull in a fall. In a morass, Watson. I'm at my wit's end. Tut tut. We have solved some worse problems. At least we have plenty of material if we can only use it. Come then. And having exhausted the armor, let us see what the Dunlop with the patched cover has to offer us. We picked up the track and followed it onward for some distance. But soon the moor rose into a long, heather-tufted curve, and we left the watercourse behind us. No further help from tracks could be hoped for. At the spot where we saw the last of the Dunlop tire, it might equally have led to Holderness Hall, the stately towers of which rose some miles to our left, or to a low grey village which lay in front of us, and marked the position of the Chesterfield high road. As we approached the forbidding and squalid inn, with the sign of a gamecock above the door, Holmes gave a sudden groan, and clutched me by the shoulder to save himself from falling. He had had one of those violent strains of the ankle which leave a man helpless.
Oh,
With difficulty he limped up to the door, where a squat, dark, elderly man was smoking a black clay pipe. "How are you, Mr. Reuben Hayes?" said Holmes. "Who are you, and how do you get my name so pat?" the countryman answered with a suspicious flash of a pair of cunning eyes. "Well, it's printed on the board above your head. It's easy to see a man who is master of his own house. I suppose you haven't such a thing as a carriage in your stables?" "No, I have not." "I can hardly put my foot to the ground." "Don't put it to the ground." "But I can't walk." "Well then, hop."
God, he's
Mr.
nuts.
Reuben Hayes's manner was far from gracious, but Holmes took it with admirable good humour. "Look here, my man," said he. "This is really rather an awkward fix for me. I don't mind how I get on." "Neither do I," said the morose landlord. "The matter is very important. I would offer you a sovereign for the use of a bicycle." The landlord pricked up his ears. "Where do you want to go?" "To Holderness Hall." "Fowls of the Duke, I suppose," said the landlord, surveying our mud-stained garments with ironical eyes. Holmes laughed good-naturedly. "He'll be glad to see us, anyhow." "Why?" "Because we bring him news of his lost son." The landlord gave a very visible start. "What? You're on his track?" "He has been heard of in Liverpool. They expect to get him every hour." Again a swift change passed over the heavy, unshaven face. His manner was suddenly genial. "I've less reason to wish the Duke well than most men," said he, "for I was head coachman once, and cruel bad he treated me. It was him that sacked me without a character, on the word of a lying corn chandler. But I'm glad to hear that the young lord was heard of in Liverpool, and I'll help you to take the news to the Hall." "Thank you," said Holmes. "We'll have some food first. Then you can bring round the bicycle." "I haven't got a bicycle." Holmes held up a sovereign. "I tell you, man, that I haven't got one. I'll let you have 2 horses as far as the Hall." "Well, well," said Holmes. "We'll talk about it when we've had something to eat." When we were left alone in the stone-flagged kitchen, it was astonishing how rapidly that sprained ankle recovered. It was nearly nightfall, and we had eaten nothing since early morning, so that we spent some time over our meal. Holmes was lost in thought, and once or twice he walked over to the window and stared earnestly out. It opened onto a squalid courtyard. In the far corner was a smithy, where a grimy lad was at work. On the other side were the stables. Holmes had sat down again after one of these excursions, when he suddenly sprang out of his chair with a loud exclamation. By heavens, Watson, I believe that I've got it, he cried. Yes, yes, it must be so. Watson, do you remember seeing any cow tracks today? Yes, several. Where? Well, everywhere. They were at the morass and again on the path, and again near where poor Heidegger met his death. Exactly. Well now, Watson, how many cows did you see on the moor? I don't remember seeing any. Strange, Watson, that we should see tracks all along our line, but never a cow on the whole moor. Very strange, Watson, eh? Yes, it is strange. Now, Watson, make an effort. Throw your mind back. Can you see those tracks upon the path? Yes, I can. Can you recall that the tracks were sometimes like that, Watson? He arranged a number of breadcrumbs in a certain fashion, and sometimes like this. He arranged them again, and occasionally like this. Can you remember that? No, I cannot, but I can. I could swear to it. However, we will go back at our leisure and verify it. What a blind beetle I have been, not to draw my conclusion.
Somebody wearing special shoes.
What is your conclusion? Only that it is a remarkable cow which walks, canters, and gallops. By George! Watson, it was no brain of a country publican that thought out such a blind as that. The coast seems to be clear, save for that lad in the smithy. Let us slip out and see what we can see. There were two rough-haired, unkempt horses in the tumble-down stable. Holmes raised the hind leg of one of them and laughed aloud. Old shoes, but newly shod. Old shoes, but new nails. This case deserves to be a classic. Let us go across to the smithy. The lad continued his work without regarding us. I saw Holmes's eye darting to right and left among the litter of iron and wood which was scattered about the floor. Suddenly, however, we heard a step behind us, and there was the landlord, his heavy eyebrows drawn over his savage eyes, his swarthy features convulsed with passion. He held a short, metal-headed stick in his hand, and he advanced in so menacing a fashion that I was right glad to feel the revolver in my pocket. You infernal spies, the man cried. What are you doing there? Why, Mr. Reuben Hayes, said Holmes coolly. One might think that you were afraid about finding something out. The man mastered himself with a violent effort, and his grim mouth loosened into a false laugh, which was more menacing than his frown. You're welcome to all you can find out in my smithy, said he. But look here, mister. I don't care for folk poking about my place without my leave. So the sooner you pay your score and get out of this, the better I shall be pleased. All right, Mr. Hayes, no harm meant, said Holmes. We have been having a look at your horses, but I think I'll walk after all. It's not far, I believe. Not more than 2 miles to the Hall gates. That's the road to the left. He watched us with sullen eyes until we had left his premises. We did not go very far along the road, for Holmes stopped the instant that the curve hid us from the landlord's view. We were warm, as the children say, at that inn, said he. I seem to grow colder every step that I take away from it. No, I can't possibly leave it. I'm convinced, said I, that this Reuben Hayes knows all about it. A more self-evident villain I never saw. Oh, he impressed you in that way, did he? There are the horses. There is the smithy. Yes, it is an interesting place, this Fighting Cock. I think we shall have another look at it in an unobtrusive way. A long sloping hillside dotted with grey limestone boulders stretched behind us. We had turned off the road and were making our way up the hill when, looking in the direction of Holderness Hall, I saw a cyclist coming swiftly along. Get down, Watson, cried Holmes, with a heavy hand upon my shoulder. We had hardly sunk from view when the man flew past us on the road. Amid a rolling cloud of dust, I caught a glimpse of a pale, agitated face, a face with horror in every lineament, the mouth open, the eyes staring wildly in front. It was like some strange caricature of the dapper James Wilder whom we had seen the night before. The Duke's secretary, cried Holmes. Come, Watson, let us see what he does. We scrambled from rock to rock, until in a few moments we had made our way to a point from which we could see the front door of the inn. Wilder's bicycle was leaning against the wall beside it. No one was moving about the house, nor could we catch a glimpse of any faces at the windows. Slowly the twilight crept down as the sun sank behind the high towers of Holderness Hall. Then, in the gloom, we saw the two side lamps of a trap light up in the stable yard of the inn, and shortly afterwards heard the rattle of hoofs as it wheeled out into the road and tore off at a furious pace in the direction of Chesterfield. "What do you make of that, Watson?" Holmes whispered. "It looks like a flight. A single man in a dog cart, so far as I could see. Well, it certainly was not Mr. James Wilder, for there he is at the door." A red square of light had sprung out of the darkness. In the middle of it was the black figure of the secretary, his head advanced, peering out into the night. It was evident that he was expecting someone. Then at last there were steps in the road. A second figure was visible for an instant against the light. The door shut, and all was black once more. 5 minutes later, a lamp was lit in a room upon the first floor. "It seems to be a curious class of custom that is done by the Fighting Cock," said Holmes. "The bar is on the other side." "Quite so. These are what one may call the private guests. Now, what in the world is Mr. James Wilder doing in that den at this hour of night? And who is the companion who comes to meet him there? Come, Watson, we must really take a risk and try to investigate this a little more closely." Together we stole down to the road and crept across to the door of the inn. The bicycle still leaned against the wall. Holmes struck a match and he held it to the back wheel, and I heard him chuckle as the light fell upon the patched Dunlop tire. Up above us was the lighted window. "I must have a peek through that, Watson. If you bend your back and support yourself upon the wall, I think that I can manage." An instant later his feet were on my shoulders, but he was hardly up before he was down again. "Come, my friend," said he. "Our day's work has been quite long enough. I think that we have gathered all that we can. It's a long walk to the school, and the sooner we get started, the better." He hardly opened his lips during that weary trudge across the moor, nor would he enter the school when he reached it, but went on to Mackleton Station, whence he could send some telegrams. Late at night I heard him consoling Dr. Huxtable, prostrated by the tragedy of his master's death. And later still he entered my room as alert and vigorous as he had been when he started in the morning. "All goes well, my friend," said he. "I promise that before tomorrow evening we shall have reached the solution of the mystery." At 11 o'clock next morning my friend and I were walking up the famous Yew Avenue of Holderness Hall. We were ushered through the magnificent Elizabethan doorway and into His Grace's study. There we found Mr. James Wilder, demure and courtly, but with some trace of that wild terror of the night before still lurking in his furtive eyes and in his twitching features. "You have come to see His Grace. I am sorry, but the fact is that the Duke is far from well. He has been very much upset by the tragic news. We received a telegram from Dr. Huxtable yesterday afternoon, which told us of your discovery. I must see the Duke, Mr. Wilder. But he is in his room. Then I must go to his room. I believe he is in his bed. I will see him there." Holmes's cold and inexorable manner showed the secretary that it was useless to argue with him. "Very good, Mr. Holmes. I will tell him that you are here." After an hour's delay, the great nobleman appeared. His face was more cadaverous than ever. His shoulders had rounded, and he seemed to me to be an altogether older man than he had been the morning before. He greeted us with a stately courtesy and seated himself at his desk, his red beard streaming down on the table. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said he. But my friend's eyes were fixed upon the secretary, who stood by his master's chair. "I think, Your Grace, that I could speak more freely in Mr. Wilder's absence." The man turned a shade paler and cast a malignant glance at Holmes. If your Grace wishes. Yes, you'd better go. Now, Mr. Holmes, what have you to say? My friend waited until the door had closed behind the retreating secretary. The fact is, Your Grace, said he, that my colleague, Dr. Watson, and myself had an assurance from Dr. Huxtable that a reward had been offered in this case. I should like to have this confirmed from your own lips. Certainly, Mr. Holmes. It amounted, if I am correctly informed, to £5,000 to anyone who will tell you where your son is. Exactly. And another 1,000 to the man who will name the person, or persons, who keep him in custody. Exactly. Under the latter heading is included, no doubt, not only those who may have taken him away, but also those who conspire to keep him in his present position. Yes, cried the Duke impatiently. If you do your work well, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you will have no reason to complain of niggardly treatment. My friend rubbed his thin hands together with an appearance of avidity which was a surprise to me, who knew his frugal tastes. I fancy that I see your Grace's cheque-book upon the table, said he. I should be glad if you would make me out a cheque for £6,000. It would be as well, perhaps, for you to cross it. The Capital and Counties Bank, Oxford Street branch, are my agents. His Grace sat very stern and upright in his chair, and looked stonily at my friend. Is this a joke, Mr. Holmes? It is hardly a subject for pleasantry. Not at all.
Yeah, don't be an asshole. Where's his
I was
son?
never more earnest in my life. What do you mean, then? I mean that I have earned the reward. I know where your son is, and I know some, at least, of those who are holding him. The Duke's beard had turned more aggressively red than ever against his ghastly white face. Where is he? He gasped. He is, or was last night, at the Fighting Cock Inn, about 2 miles from your park gate. The Duke fell back in his chair. And whom do you accuse? Sherlock Holmes's answer was an astounding one. He stepped swiftly forward and touched the Duke upon the shoulder. I accuse you, he said. And now, Your Grace, I'll trouble you for that cheque. Never shall I forget the Duke's appearance as he sprang up and clawed with his hands, like one who is sinking into an abyss. Then, with an extraordinary effort of aristocratic self-command, he sat down and sank his face in his hands. It was some minutes before he spoke. How much do you know? He asked at last, without raising his head. I saw you together last night. Does anyone else beside your friend know? I have spoken to no one. The Duke took a pen in his quivering fingers and opened his chequebook. I shall be as good as my word, Mr. Holmes. I'm about to write your cheque, however unwelcome the information which you have gained may be to me. When the offer was first made, I little thought the turn which events might take. But you and your friend are men of discretion, Mr. Holmes. I hardly understand, Your Grace. I must put it plainly, Mr. Holmes. If only you two know of this incident, there is no reason why it should go any farther. I think £12,000 is the sum that I owe you, is it not? But Holmes smiled and shook his head. I fear, Your Grace, that matters can hardly be arranged so easily. There is the death of this schoolmaster to be accounted for. But James knew nothing of that. You cannot hold him responsible for that. It was the work of this brutal ruffian, whom he had the misfortune to employ. I must take the view, Your Grace, that when a man embarks upon a crime, he is morally guilty of any other crime which may spring from it. Morally, Mr. Holmes, no doubt you're right, but surely not in the eyes of the law. A man cannot be condemned for a murder at which he was not present, and which he loathes and abhors as much as you do. The instant that he heard of it, he made a complete confession to me. So filled was he with horror and remorse. He lost not an hour in breaking entirely with the murderer. Oh, Mr. Holmes, you must save him. You must save him. I tell you that you must save him. The Duke had dropped the last attempt at self-command and was pacing the room with a convulsed face and with his clenched hands raving in the air. At last, he mastered himself and sat down once more at his desk. "I appreciate your conduct in coming here before you spoke to anyone else," said he. "At least we may take counsel how far we can minimize this hideous scandal." "Exactly," said Holmes. "I think, Your Grace, that this can only be done by absolute frankness between us. I am disposed to help Your Grace to the best of my ability, but in order to do so, I must understand to the last detail how the matter stands. I realize that your words applied to Mr. James Wilder, and that he is not the murderer. No, the murderer has escaped." Sherlock Holmes smiled demurely. "Your Grace can hardly have heard of any small reputation which I possess, or you would not imagine that it is so easy to escape me. Mr. Reuben Hayes was arrested at Chesterfield, on my information, at 11 o'clock last night. I had a telegram from the head of the local police before I left the school this morning." The Duke leaned back in his chair and stared with amazement at my friend. "You seem to have powers that are hardly human," said he. "So Reuben Hayes is taken. I'm right glad to hear of it. If it will not react upon the fate of James." "Your secretary?" "No, sir. My son." It was Holmes's turn to astonish. "I confess that this is entirely new to me, Your Grace. I must beg you to be more explicit." "I will conceal nothing from you. I agree with you that complete frankness, however painful it may be to me, is the best policy in this desperate situation to which James's folly and jealousy have reduced us. When I was a very young man, Mr. Holmes, I loved with such a love as comes only once in a lifetime. I offered the lady marriage, but she refused it on the grounds that such a match might mar my career. Had she lived, I would certainly never have married anyone else. She died and left this one child, whom for her sake I have cherished and cared for. I could not acknowledge the paternity to the world, but I gave him the best of educations, and since he came to manhood, I have kept him near my person. He surmised my secret, and has presumed ever since upon the claim which he has upon me, and upon his power of provoking a scandal which would be abhorrent to me. His presence had something to do with the unhappy issue of my marriage. Above all, he hated my young, legitimate heir from the first, with a persistent hatred. You may well ask me why, under these circumstances, I still kept James under my roof. I answer that it was because I could see his mother's face in his, and that for her dear sake there was no end to my long suffering. All her pretty ways, too. There was not one of them which he could not suggest and bring back to my memory. I could not send him away, but I feared so much lest he should do Arthur, that is Lord Saltire, a mischief, that I dispatched him for safety to Dr. Huxtable's school. James came into contact with this fellow Hayes because the man was a tenant of mine, and James acted as agent. The fellow was a rascal from the beginning, but in some extraordinary way James became intimate with him. He had always a taste for low company. When James determined to kidnap Lord Saltire, it was of this man's service that he availed himself. You remember that I wrote to Arthur upon that last day? Well, James opened the letter and inserted a note asking Arthur to meet him in a little wood called the Ragged Shore, which is near to the school. He used the Duchess's name, and in that way got the boy to come. That evening, James bicycled over. I'm telling you what he has himself confessed to me, and he told Arthur, whom he met in the wood, that his mother longed to see him, that she was awaiting him on the moor, and that if he would come back into the wood at midnight, he would find a man with a horse who would take him to her. Poor Arthur fell into the trap. He came to the appointment,
and found this fellow Hayes with a lead pony. Arthur mounted, and they set off together. It appears, though this James only heard yesterday, that they were pursued, that Hayes struck the pursuer with his stick, and that the man died of his injuries. Hayes brought Arthur to his public house, the Fighting Cock, where he was confined in an upper room, under the care of Mrs. Hayes, who is a kindly woman, but entirely under the control of her brutal husband. Well, Mr. Holmes, that was the state of affairs when I first saw you 2 days ago. I had no more idea of the truth than you. You will ask me what was James's motive in doing such a deed? I answer that there was a great deal which was unreasoning and fanatical in the hatred which he bore my heir. In his view, he should himself have been heir of all my estates, and he deeply resented those social laws which made it impossible. At the same time, he had a definite motive also. He was eager that I should break the entail, and he was of opinion that it lay in my power to do so. He intended to make a bargain with me, to restore Arthur if I would break the entail, and so make it possible for the estate to be left to him by will. He knew well that I should never willingly invoke the aid of the police against him. I say that he would have proposed such a bargain to me, but he did not actually do so, for events moved too quickly for him, and he had not time to put his plans into practice. What brought all this wicked scheme to wreck was your discovery of this man Heidegger's dead body. James was seized with horror at the news. It came to us yesterday as we sat together in this study. Dr. Huxtable had sent a telegram. James was so overwhelmed with grief and agitation that my suspicions, which had never been entirely absent, rose instantly to a certainty, and I taxed him with the deed. He made a complete voluntary confession. Then he implored me to keep his secret for 3 days longer, so as to give his wretched accomplice a chance of saving his guilty life. I yielded, as I have always yielded, to his prayers, and instantly James hurried off to the Fighting Cock to warn Hayes and give him the means of flight. I could not go there by daylight without provoking comment, but as soon as night fell, I hurried off to see my dear Arthur. I found him safe and well, but horrified beyond expression by the dreadful deed he had witnessed. In deference to my promise, and much against my will, I consented to leave him there for 3 days, under the charge of Mrs. Hayes, since it was evident that it was impossible to inform the police where he was, without telling them also who was the murderer. And I could not see how that murderer could be punished without ruin to my unfortunate James. You asked for frankness, Mr. Holmes, and I have taken you at your word, for I have now told you everything without an attempt at circumlocution or concealment. Do you, in turn, be as frank with me? I will, said Holmes. In the first place, Your Grace, I am bound to tell you that you have placed yourself in a most serious position in the eyes of the law. You have condoned a felony, and you have aided the escape of a murderer. For I cannot doubt that any money which was taken by James Wilder to aid his accomplice in his flight came from Your Grace's purse. The Duke bowed his assent. This is indeed a most serious matter. Even more culpable, in my opinion, Your Grace, is your attitude towards your younger son. You leave him in this den for 3 days, under solemn promises. What are promises to such people as these? You have no guarantee that he will not be spirited away again. To humour your guilty elder son, you have exposed your innocent younger son to imminent and unnecessary danger. It was a most unjustifiable action. The proud lord of Holderness was not accustomed to be so rated in his own ducal hall. The blood flushed into his high forehead, but his conscience held him dumb. I will help you, but on one condition only. It is that you ring for the footman and let me give such orders as I like. Without a word, the Duke pressed the electric bell. The servant entered. You will be glad to hear, said Holmes, that your young master is found. It is the Duke's desire that the carriage shall go at once to the Fighting Cock Inn to bring Lord Saltire home. Now, said Holmes when the rejoicing lackey had disappeared, having secured the future, we can afford to be more lenient with the past. I am not in an official position, and there is no reason, so long as the ends of justice are served, why I should disclose all that I know. As to Hayes, I say nothing. The gallows awaits him. I would do nothing to save him from. What he will divulge, I cannot tell. But I have no doubt that your Grace will make him understand that it is to his interest to be silent. From the police point of view, he will have kidnapped the boy for the purpose of ransom. If they do not themselves find it out, to take a broader point of view. I would warn your Grace, however, that the continued presence of Mr. James Wilder in your household can only lead to misfortune. I understand that, Mr. Holmes, and it is already settled that he shall leave me forever and go to seek his fortune in Australia. In that case, your Grace, since you have yourself stated that any unhappiness in your married life was caused by his presence, I would suggest that you make such amends as you can to the Duchess, and that you try to resume those relations which have been so unhappily interrupted. That also I have arranged, Mr. Holmes. I wrote to the Duchess this morning. In that case, said Holmes, rising, I think that my friend and I can congratulate ourselves upon several most happy results from our little visit to the north. There is one other small point upon which I desire some light. This fellow Hayes had trod his horses with shoes which counterfeited the tracks of cows. Was it from Mr. Wilder that he learned so extraordinary a device? The Duke stood in thought for a moment, with a look of intense surprise on his face. Then he opened a door and showed us into a large room furnished as a museum. He led the way to a glass case in a corner and pointed to the inscription. These shoes, it ran, were dug up in the moat of Holderness Hall. They are for the use of horses, but they are shaped below with a cloven foot of iron, so as to throw pursuers off the track. They are supposed to have belonged to some of the marauding barons of Holderness in the Middle Ages. Holmes opened the case, and moistening his finger, he passed it along the shoe. A thin film of recent mud was left upon his skin. Thank you, said he, as he replaced the glass. It is the second most interesting object that I have seen in the north. And the first? Holmes folded up his cheque and placed it carefully in his notebook. I am a poor man, said he, as he patted it affectionately and thrust it into the depths of his inner pocket.
A poor man, said he. Fuck you, you're poor.
It's proven. Revitalift visibly reduces the look of wrinkles. Firm still
Oh,
brightens.
that's not a good
I saw
feeling.
results in 1 week.
When you get a round-trip companion,
This might be
option
my
every
last one
year,
for tonight because my
everyone you
fingers
know
are
will want to
starting
be
to
your companion.
not do good things.
The Adventure of the Naval Treaty. The July, which immediately succeeded my marriage, was made memorable by 3 cases of interest in which I had the privilege of being associated with Sherlock Holmes and of studying his
Yeah,
methods.
remember your wife?
I find them
Chapter
recorded in
1?
my notes under the headings of The Adventure of the Second Stain, The Adventure of the Naval Treaty, and The Adventure of the Tired Captain. The first of these, however, deals with interests of such importance and implicates so many of the first families in the kingdom that for many years it will be impossible to make it public. No case, however, in which Holmes was ever engaged has illustrated the value of his analytical methods so clearly, or has impressed those who were associated with him so deeply. I still retain an almost verbatim report of the interview in which he demonstrated the true facts of the case to Monsieur Dubuc, of the Paris police, and Fritz von Waldbaum, the well-known specialist of Danzig, both of whom had wasted their energies upon what proved to be side issues. The new century will have come, however, before the story can be safely told. Meanwhile, I must pass on to the second upon my list, which promised also at one time to be of national importance and was marked by several incidents which gave it a quite unique character. During my school days, I had been intimately associated with a lad named Percy Phelps, who was of much the same age as myself, though he was 2 classes ahead of me. He was a very brilliant boy and carried away every prize which the school had to offer, finishing his exploits by winning a scholarship which sent him on to continue his triumphant career at Cambridge. He was, I remember, extremely well connected, and even when we were all little boys together, we knew that his mother's brother was Lord Holdhurst, the great Conservative politician. This gaudy relationship did him little good at school. On the contrary, it seemed rather a piquant thing to us to chevy him about the playground and hit him over the shins with a wicket. But it was another thing when he came out into the world. I heard vaguely that his abilities and the influence which he commanded had won him a good position at the Foreign Office. And then he passed completely out of my mind, until the following letter recalled his existence. Briarbrae, Woking. My dear Watson, I have no doubt that you can remember Tadpole Phelps, who was in the 5th form when you were in the 3rd. It is possible even that you may have heard that, through my uncle's influence, I obtained a good appointment at the Foreign Office, and that I was in a situation of trust and honour until a horrible misfortune came suddenly to blast my career. There is no use writing the details of that dreadful event.
I'm okay.
In the event of your acceding to my request, it is possible that I shall have to narrate them to you. I've only just recovered from 9 weeks of brain fever and am still exceedingly weak. Do you think that you could bring your friend, Mr. Holmes, down to see me? I should like to have his opinion of the case. Though the authorities assure me that nothing more can be done, do try to bring him down, and as soon as possible. Every minute seems an hour while I live in this horrible suspense. Assure him that if I have not asked his advice sooner, it was not because I did not appreciate his talents, but because I have been off my head ever since the blow fell. Now I am clear again, though I dare not think of it too much for fear of a relapse. I'm still so weak that I have to write, as you see, by dictating. Do try and bring him. Your old schoolfellow, Percy Phelps. There was something that touched me as I read this letter, something pitiable in the reiterated appeals to bring Holmes. So moved was I that, even if it had been a difficult matter, I should have tried it. But of course I knew well that Holmes loved his art so, that he was ever as ready to bring his aid as his client could be to receive it. My wife agreed with me that not a moment should be lost in laying the matter before him. And so, within an hour of breakfast time, I found myself back once more in the old rooms in Baker Street. Holmes was seated at his side table, clad in his dressing gown, and working hard over a chemical investigation. A large curved retort was boiling furiously in the bluish flame of a Bunsen burner, and the distilled drops were condensing in a 2-litre measure. My friend hardly glanced up as I entered. The investigation must be of importance. Seated, he dipped into this bottle
you
or
okay,
that,
baby?
drawing out a few drops of each with his glass pipette, and finally brought a test tube containing a solution over to the table. In his right hand he had a slip of litmus paper. "You come at a crisis, Watson," said he. "If this paper remains blue, all is well. If it turns red, it means a man's life." He dipped it into the test tube, and it flushed at once into a dull, dirty crimson. "I thought as much," he cried. "I will be at your service in one instant, Watson. You will find tobacco in the Persian slipper." He turned to his desk and scribbled off several telegrams, which were handed over to the page boy. Then he threw himself down in the chair opposite, and drew up his knees until his fingers clasped round his long, thin shins. "A very commonplace little murder," said he. "You've got something better, I fancy. You are the stormy petrel of crime, Watson. What is it?" I handed him the letter, which he read with the most concentrated attention. "It does not tell us very much, does it?" he remarked, as he handed it back to me. "Hardly anything. And yet the writing is of interest." "But the writing is not his own." "Precisely. It is a woman's." "A man's, surely," I cried. "No, a woman's. And a woman of rare character. You see, at the commencement of an investigation, it is something to know that your client is in close contact with someone who, for good or evil, has an exceptional nature. My interest is already awakened in the case. If you are ready, we will start at once for Woking.
ASMR.
You see this diplomatist, who is in such evil case, and the lady to whom he dictates his letters. We were fortunate enough to catch an early train at Waterloo, and in a little under an hour, we found ourselves among the fir woods and the heather of Woking. Briarbrae proved to be a large, detached house, standing in extensive grounds within a few minutes' walk of the station. On sending in
I'm
our
almost done
cards,
for the night.
we were
Head
shown into an
count.
elegantly appointed
1,
drawing room,
2,
where we were joined in a few by a rather
4,
stout man,
5,
who received
6,
us with much hospitality.
7, 8,
His age may have been nearer
9,
40 than 30,
10.
but his cheeks were so ruddy and his eyes so merry that he conveyed the impression of a plump and mischievous boy. "I am so glad that you have come," said he, shaking our hands with effusion. "Percy has been
we don't
inquiring
fit.
for you all the morning.
Different.
Our poor old chap.
Never mind
He
then.
clings to any straw. His father and mother asked me to see you, but the mere mention of the subject is very painful to them." "We have had no details yet,"
Hello.
observed Holmes.
Still work.
"I perceive that you are not yourself a member of the family." Our acquaintance looked surprised, and then, glancing down, he began to laugh. "Of course you saw the J.H. monogram on my locket," said he. "For a moment I thought you had done something clever. Joseph Harrison is my name, and as Percy is to marry my sister Annie, I shall at least be a relation by marriage. You will find my sister in his room, for she has nursed him hand and foot these 2 months back. Perhaps we had better go in at once, for I know how impatient he is." The chamber into which we were shown was on the same floor as the drawing room. It was furnished partly as a sitting and partly as a bedroom, with flowers arranged daintily in every nook and corner. A young man, very pale and worn, was lying upon a sofa near the open window, through which came the rich scent of the garden and the balmy summer air. A woman was sitting beside him and rose as we entered. "Shall I leave, Percy?" she asked. He clutched her hand to detain her. "How are you, Watson?" said he cordially. "I should never have known you under that moustache, and I dare say you would not be prepared to swear to me. This, I presume, is your celebrated friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." I introduced him in a few words, and we both sat down. The stout young man had left us, but his sister still remained, with her hand in that of the invalid. She was a striking-looking woman, a little short and thick for symmetry, but with a beautiful olive complexion, large, dark Italian eyes, and a wealth of deep black hair. Her rich tints made the white face of her companion the more worn and haggard by the contrast. "I won't waste your time," said he, raising himself upon the sofa. "I'll plunge into the matter without further preamble. I was a happy and successful man, Mr. Holmes, and on the eve of being married when a sudden and dreadful misfortune wrecked all my prospects in life. I was, as Watson may have told you, in the Foreign Office, and through the influence of my uncle, Lord Holdhurst, I rose rapidly to a responsible position. When my uncle became Foreign Minister in this administration, he gave me several missions of trust, and as I always brought them to a successful conclusion, he came at last to have the utmost confidence in my ability and tact. Nearly 10 weeks ago, to be more accurate, on the 23rd of May, he called me into his private room and, after complimenting me upon the good work which I had done, informed me that he had a new commission of trust for me to execute. This, said he, taking a grey roll of paper from his bureau, is the original of that secret treaty between England and Italy, of which, I regret to say, some rumours have already got into the public press. It is of enormous importance that nothing further should leak out. The French or Russian embassies would pay an immense sum to learn the contents of these papers. They should not leave my bureau, were it not that it is absolutely necessary to have them copied. You have a desk in your office? Yes, sir. Then take the treaty and lock it up there. I shall give directions that you may remain behind when the others go, so that you may copy it at your leisure without fear of being overlooked. When you have finished, relock both the original and the draft in the desk, and hand them over to me personally tomorrow morning. I took the papers and... Excuse me an instant, said Holmes. Were you alone during this conversation? Absolutely. In a large room? 30 feet each way? In the centre? Yes, about it. And speaking low? My uncle's voice is always remarkably low. I hardly spoke at all. Thank you, said Holmes, shutting his eyes. Pray go on. I did exactly what he had indicated and waited until the other clerks had departed. One of them in my room, Charles Gorrow, had some arrears of work to make up, so I left him there and went out to dine. When I returned, he was gone. I was anxious to hurry my work, for I knew that Joseph, the Mr. Harrison whom you saw just now, was in town, and that he would travel down to Woking by the 11 o'clock train, and I wanted, if possible, to catch it. When I came to examine the treaty, I saw at once that it was of such importance that my uncle had been guilty of no exaggeration in what he had said. Without going into details, I may say that it defined the position of Great Britain towards the Triple Alliance, and foreshadowed the policy which this country would pursue in the event of the French fleet gaining a complete ascendancy over that of Italy in the Mediterranean. The questions treated in it were purely naval. At the end were the signatures of the high dignitaries who had signed it. I glanced my eyes over it, and then settled down to my task of copying. It was a long document, written in the French language, and containing nearly 26 separate articles. I copied as quickly as I could, but at 9 o'clock I had only done 9 articles, and it seemed hopeless for me to attempt to catch my train. I was feeling drowsy and stupid, partly from my dinner and also from the effects of a long day's work. A cup of coffee would clear my brain. A commissionaire remains all night in a little lodge at the foot of the stairs, and is in the habit of making coffee at his spirit lamp for any of the officials who may be working overtime. I rang the bell, therefore, to summon him. To my surprise, it was a woman who answered the summons, a large, horse-faced, elderly woman in an apron. She explained that she was the commissionnaire's wife who did the charring, and I gave her the order for the coffee. I wrote 2 more articles, and then, feeling more drowsy than ever, I rose and walked up and down the room to stretch my legs. My coffee had not yet come, and I wondered what the cause of the delay could be. Opening the door, I started down the corridor to find out. There was a straight passage, dimly lit, which led from the room in which I had been working, and was the only exit from it. It ended in a curving staircase, with the commissionnaire's lodge in the passage at the bottom. Halfway down this staircase is a small landing, with another passage running into it at right angles. This second one leads, by means of a second small stair, to a side door used by servants, and also as a shortcut by clerks when coming from Charles Street. Here is a rough chart of the place. Thank you, I think that I quite follow you,
Hi, sweetie.
said Sherlock Holmes.
Coming down to hang
It
me
is
for a
of the
bit.
utmost importance that you should notice this point. I went down the stairs and into the hall, where I found the commissionaire fast asleep in his box, with the kettle boiling furiously upon the spirit lamp, for the water was spurting over the floor. I had put out my hand and was about to shake the man, who was still sleeping soundly, when a bell over his head rang loudly, and he woke with a start. "Mr. Phelps, sir," said he, looking at me in bewilderment. "I came down to see if my coffee was ready. I was boiling the kettle when I fell asleep, sir." He looked at me and
That's
then
pretty.
up at the still quivering
Come on,
bell,
babe.
with an ever-growing astonishment upon his face. "If you was here, sir, then who rang the bell?" he asked. "The bell?" I said. "What bell is it?" "It's the bell of the room you were working in." A cold hand seemed to close round my heart.
Ooh.
Someone, then, was in that room where my precious treaty lay upon the table. I ran frantically up the stairs and along the passage. There was no one in the corridor, Mr. Holmes. There was no one in the room. All was exactly as I left it, save only that the papers committed to my care had been taken from the desk on which they lay. The copy was there, and the original was gone. Holmes sat up in his chair and rubbed his hands. I could see that the problem was entirely to his heart. "Pray, what did you do then?" he murmured. I recognized in an instant that the thief must have come up the stairs from the side door. Of course, I must have met him if he had come the other way. You were satisfied that he could not have been concealed in the room all the time, or in the corridor which you have just described as dimly lighted. It is absolutely impossible. A rat could not conceal himself either in the room or the corridor. There is no cover at all. Thank you. Pray proceed. The commissionaire, seeing by my pale face that something was to be feared, had followed me upstairs. Now we both rushed along the corridor and down the steep steps which led to Charles Street. The door at the bottom was closed, but unlocked. We flung it open and rushed out. I can distinctly remember that as we did so, there came 3 chimes from a neighbouring church. It was 10:15. "That is of enormous importance," said Holmes, making a note upon his shirt cuff. The night was very dark, and a thin, warm rain was falling. There was no one in Charles Street, but a great traffic was going on, as usual, in Whitehall at the extremity. We rushed along the pavement, bareheaded as we were, and at the far corner we found a policeman standing. "A robbery has been committed," I gasped. "A document of immense value has been stolen from the Foreign Office. Has anyone passed this way?" "I've been standing here for a quarter of an hour, sir," said he. "Only one person has passed during that time, a woman, tall and elderly, with a paisley shawl." "Ah, that is only my wife," cried the commissionaire. "Has no one else passed?" "No one." "Then it must be the other way that the thief took," cried the fellow, tugging at my sleeve. But I was not satisfied, and the attempts which he made to draw me away increased my suspicions. "Which way did the woman go?" I cried. "I don't know, sir. I noticed her pass, but I had no special reason for watching her. She seemed to be in a hurry." "How long ago was it?" "Oh, not very many minutes." "Within the last 5? "Well, it could not be more than 5. "You're only wasting your time, sir, and every minute now is of importance," cried the commissionaire. "Take my word for it that my old woman has nothing to do with it. And come down to the other end of the street." "Well, if you won't, I will." And with that he rushed off in the other direction. But I was after him in an instant and caught him by the sleeve. "Where do you live?" said I. "Number 16, Ivy Lane, Brixton," he answered. "But don't let yourself be drawn away upon a false scent, Mr. Phelps. Come to the other end of the street, and let us see if we can hear of anything." Nothing was to be lost by following his advice. With the policeman we both hurried down, but only to find the street full of traffic, many people coming and going, but all only too eager to get to a place of safety upon so wet a night. There was no lounger who could tell us who had passed. Then we returned to the office and searched the stairs and the passage without result. The corridor which led to the room was laid down with a kind of creamy linoleum which shows an impression very easily. We examined it very carefully, but found no outline of any footmark. Had it been raining all the evening? Since about 7? How is it then that the woman who came into the room about 9 left no traces with her muddy boots? I raised the point. It occurred to me at the time. The charwomen are in the habit of taking off their boots at the commissionnaire's office and putting on list slippers. That is very clear. There were no marks then, though the night was a wet one. The chain of events is certainly one of extraordinary interest.
There we go.
What did you do next? We examined the room also. There was no possibility of a secret door, and the windows are quite 30 feet from the ground. Both of them were fastened on the inside. The carpet prevents any possibility of a trapdoor, and the ceiling is of the ordinary whitewashed kind. I will pledge my life that whoever stole my papers could only have come through the door. How about the fireplace? They use none. There is a stove. The bell rope hangs from the wire just to the right of my desk. Whoever rang it must have come right up to the desk to do it. But why should any criminal wish to ring the bell? It is a most insoluble mystery. Certainly the incident was unusual. What were your
They
next
got them out of the
steps?
room, so they went out the
You
other way.
examined the room, I presume, to see if the intruder had left any traces, any cigar end, or dropped glove, or hairpin, or other trifle. There was nothing of the sort. No smell? Well, we never thought of that. A scent of tobacco would have been worth a great deal to us in such an investigation. I never smoked myself, so I think I should have observed it if there had been any smell of tobacco. There was absolutely no clue of any kind. The only tangible fact was that the commissionaire's wife, Mrs. Tangi was the name, had hurried out of the place. He could give no explanation save that it was about the time when the woman always went home. The policeman and I agreed that our best plan would be to seize the woman before she could get rid of the papers, presuming that she had them. The alarm had reached Scotland Yard by this time, and Mr. Forbes, the detective, came round at once and took up the case with a great deal of energy. We hired a hansom, and in half an hour we were at the address which had been given to us. A young woman opened the door, who proved to be Mrs. Tangi's eldest daughter. Her mother had not come back yet, and we were shown into the front room to wait. About 10 minutes later, a knock came at the door, and here we made the one serious mistake for which I blame myself. Instead of opening the door ourselves, we allowed the girl to do so. We heard her say, "Mother, there are 2 men in the house waiting to see you." And an instant afterwards, we heard the patter of feet rushing down the passage. Forbes flung open the door, and we both ran into the back room or kitchen. But the woman had got there before us. She stared at us with defiant eyes, and then suddenly recognizing me, an expression of absolute astonishment came over her face. "Why, if it isn't Mr. Phelps of the office," she cried. Come, come, who do you think we were when you ran away from us?" asked my companion. "I thought you were the brokers," said she. "We've had some trouble with a tradesman." "That's not quite good enough," answered Forbes. "We have reason to believe that you have taken a paper of importance from the Foreign Office, and that you ran in here to dispose of it. You must come back with us to Scotland Yard to be searched." It was in vain that she protested and resisted. A four-wheeler was brought, and we all three drove back in it. We had first made an examination of the kitchen, and especially of the kitchen fire, to see whether she might have made away with the papers during the instant that she was alone. There were no signs, however, of any ashes or scraps. When we reached Scotland Yard, she was handed over at once to the female searcher. I waited in an agony of suspense until she came back with her report. There were no signs of the papers. Then for the first time the horror of my situation came in its full force upon me. Hitherto I had been acting, and action had numbed thought. I had been so confident of regaining the treaty at once that I had not dared to think of what would be the consequence if I failed to do so. But now there was nothing more to be done, and I had leisure to realize my position.
All right, I need a
was
snack.
horrible.
I am absolutely famished. I'm going to be right back. go. Oh, I'm back. Here, baby. I love you, baby. I'm gonna find you something for your face. I'm gonna stitch this together, I think, and I'm gonna call that a night.
Watson there will tell you that I was a nervous, sensitive boy at school. It is my nature. I thought of my uncle and of his colleagues in the cabinet, of the shame which I had brought upon him, upon myself, upon everyone connected with me. What though I was the victim of an extraordinary accident? No allowance is made for accidents where diplomatic interests are at stake. I was ruined, shamefully, hopelessly ruined. I don't know what I did. I fancy I must have made a scene. I have a dim recollection of a group of officials who crowded round me, endeavouring to soothe me. One of them drove down with me to Waterloo and saw me into the Woking train. I believe that he would have come all the way, had it not been that Dr. Ferrier, who lives near me, was going down by that very train. The doctor most kindly took charge of me, and it was well he did so, for I had a fit in the station, and before we reached home I was practically a raving maniac. You can imagine the state of things here when they were roused from their beds by the doctor's ringing and found me in this condition. Poor Annie here and my mother were broken-hearted. Dr. Ferrier had just heard enough from the detective at the station to be able to give an idea of what had happened, and his story did not mend matters. It was evident to all that I was in for a long illness. So Joseph was bundled out of this cheery bedroom, and it was turned into a sick room for me. Here I have lain, Mr. Holmes, for over 9 weeks, unconscious and raving with brain fever. If it had not been for Miss Harrison here, and for the doctor's care, I should not be speaking to you now. She has nursed me by day, and a hired nurse has looked after me by night. But in my mad fits I was capable of anything. Slowly my reason has cleared. But it is only during the last 3 days that my memory has quite returned. Sometimes I wish that it never had. The first thing I did was to wire Mr. Forbes, who had the case in hand. He came out and assured me that though everything has been done, no trace of a clue has been discovered. The commissionaire and his wife have been examined in every way without any light being thrown upon the matter. The suspicions of the police then rested upon young Gorrow, who, as you may remember, stayed overtime in the office that night. His remaining behind and his French name were really the only 2 points which could suggest suspicion. But as a matter of fact, I did not begin work until he had gone, and his people are of Huguenot extraction, but as English in sympathy and tradition as you and I are. Nothing was found to implicate him in any way, and there the matter dropped. I turn to you, Mr. Holmes, as absolutely my last hope. If you fail me, then my honour, as well as my position, are forever forfeited. The invalid sank back upon his cushions, tired out by this long recital, while his nurse poured him out a glass of some stimulating medicine. Holmes sat silently with his head thrown back and his eyes closed in an attitude which might seem listless to a stranger, but which I knew betokened the most intense absorption. "Your statement has been so explicit," said he at last, "that you have really left me very few questions to ask. There is one of the very utmost importance, however. Did you tell anyone that you had this special task to perform?" "No one." "Not Miss Harrison here, for example?" "No. I had not been back to Woking between getting the order and executing the commission." "And none of your people had by chance been to see you?" "None." "Did any of them know their way about in the office?" "Oh, yes. All of them had been shown over it. Still, of course, if you said nothing to anyone about the treaty, these inquiries are irrelevant." "I said nothing." "Do you know anything of the commissionaire?" "Nothing, except that he is an old soldier." "What regiment?" "Oh, I have heard. Coldstream Guards. Thank you. I have no doubt I can get details from Forbes. The authorities are excellent at amassing facts, though they don't always use them to advantage. What a lovely thing a rose is. He walked past the couch to the open window and held up the drooping stalk of a moss rose, looking down at the dainty blend of crimson and green. It was a new phase of his character to me, for I had never before seen him show any keen interest in natural objects. There is nothing in which deduction is so necessary as in religion, said he, leaning with his back against the shutters. It can be built up as an exact science by the reasoner. Our highest assurance of the goodness of Providence seems to me to rest in the flowers. All other things, our powers, our desires, our food, are really necessary for our existence in the first instance. But this rose is an extra. Its smell and its color are an embellishment of life, not a condition of it. It is only goodness which gives extras. And so I say again that we have much to hope from the flowers. Percy Phelps and his nurse looked at Holmes during this demonstration with surprise, and a good deal of disappointment written upon their faces. He had fallen into a reverie with the moss rose between his fingers. It had lasted some minutes before the young lady broke in upon it. "Do you see any prospect of solving this mystery, Mr. Holmes?" she asked, with a touch of asperity in her voice. "Oh, the mystery," he answered, coming back with a start to the realities of life. "Well, it would be absurd to deny that the case is a very abstruse and complicated one. But I can promise you that I will look into the matter and let you know any points which may strike me. Do you see any clue? You have furnished me with 7, but of course I must test them before I can pronounce upon their value. You suspect someone? I suspect myself. What? Of coming to conclusions too rapidly. Then go to London and test your conclusions. Your advice is very excellent, Miss Harrison, said Holmes, rising. I think, Watson, we cannot do better. Do not allow yourself to indulge in false hopes, Mr. Phelps. The affair is a very tangled one. I shall be in a fever until I see you again, cried the diplomatist. Well, I'll come out by the same train tomorrow, though it's more than likely that my report will be a negative one. God bless you for promising to come, cried our client. It gives me fresh life to know that something is being done. By the way, I have had a letter from Lord Holdhurst. Ha! What did he say? He was cold, but not harsh. I dare say my severe illness prevented him from being that. He repeated that the matter was of the utmost importance, and added that no steps would be taken about my future, by which he means, of course, my dismissal, until my health was restored, and I had an opportunity of repairing my misfortune. Well, that was reasonable and considerate, said Holmes. Come, Watson, for we have a good day's work before us in town. Mr. Joseph Harrison drove us down to the station, and we were soon whirling up in a Portsmouth train. Holmes was sunk in profound thought, and hardly opened his mouth until we had passed Clapham Junction. It's a very cheering thing to come into London by any of these lines which run high and allow you to look down upon the houses like this. I thought he was joking, for the view was sordid enough, but he soon explained himself. Look at those big isolated clumps of building rising above the slates, like brick islands in a lead-coloured sea. The board schools, lighthouses, my boy, beacons of the future, capsules with hundreds of bright little seeds in each, out of which will spring the wiser, better England of the future. I suppose that man Phelps does not drink. I should not think so, nor should I. But we are bound to take every possibility into account. The poor devil has certainly got himself into very deep water, and it's a question whether we shall ever be able to get him ashore. What do you think of Miss Harrison? A girl of strong character. Yes, but she is a good sort, or I am mistaken. She and her brother are the only children of an ironmaster somewhere up Northumberland way. Phelps got engaged to her when travelling last winter, and she came down to be introduced to his people, with her brother as escort. Then came the smash, and she stayed on to nurse her lover, while brother Joseph, finding himself pretty snug, stayed on too. I've been making a few independent inquiries, you see. But today must be a day of inquiries. My practice, I began. Oh, if you find your own cases more interesting than mine, said Holmes, with some asperity. I was going to say that my practice could get along very well for a day or two, since it is the slackest time in the year. Excellent, said he, recovering his good humour. Then we'll look into this matter together. I think that we should begin by seeing Forbes. He can probably tell us all the details we want, until we know from what side the case is to be approached. You said you had a clue? Well, we have several, but we can only test their value by further inquiry. The most difficult crime to track is the one which is purposeless. Now, this is not purposeless. Who is it that profits by it? There is the French ambassador, there is the Russian. There is whoever might sell it to either of these. And there is Lord Holdhurst. Lord Holdhurst? Well, it is just conceivable that a statesman might find himself in a position where he was not sorry to have such a document accidentally destroyed. Not a statesman with the honourable record of Lord Holdhurst. It is a possibility, and we cannot afford to disregard it. We shall see the noble lord today, and find out if he can tell us anything. Meanwhile, I have already set inquiries upon foot. Already? Yes, I sent wires from Woking Station to every evening paper in London. This advertisement will appear in each of them. He handed over a sheet torn from the notebook. On it was scribbled in pencil, £10 reward, the number of the cab which dropped a fare at or about the door of the Foreign Office in Charles Street at 9:45 in the evening of May the 23rd. Apply 221B, Baker Street. You're confident that the thief came in a cab? If not, there is no harm done. But if Mr. Phelps is correct in stating that there is no hiding place either in the room or the corridors, then the person must have come from outside. If he came from outside on so wet a night, and yet left no trace of damp upon the linoleum which was examined within a few minutes of his passing, then it is exceedingly probable that he came in a cab. Yes, I think that we may safely deduce a cab. It sounds plausible. That is one of the clues of which I spoke. It may lead us to something. And then, of course, there is the bell, which is the most distinctive feature of the case. Why should the bell ring? Was it the thief that did it out of bravado? Or was it someone who was with the thief, who did it in order to prevent the crime? Or was it an accident? Or was it... He sank back into the state of intense and silent thought from which he had emerged. But it seemed to me, accustomed as I was to his every mood, that some new possibility had dawned suddenly upon him. It was 3:20 when we reached our terminus, and after a hasty luncheon at the buffet, we pushed on at once to Scotland Yard. Holmes had already wired to Forbes, and we found him waiting to receive us. A small, foxy man with a sharp but by no means amiable expression. He was decidedly frigid in his manner to us, especially when he heard the errand upon which we had come. "I've heard of your methods before now, Mr. Holmes," said he tartly. "You are ready enough to use all the information that the police can lay at your disposal, and then you try to finish the case yourself and bring discredit upon them." "On the contrary," said Holmes, "out of my last 53 cases, my name has only appeared in 4, and the police have had all the credit in 49. I don't blame you for not knowing this, for you are young and inexperienced, but if you wish to get on in your new duties, you will work with me, and not against me." "I'd be very glad of a hint or two," said the detective, changing his manner. "I've certainly had no credit from the case so far. What steps have you taken?" "Tangi, the commissionaire, has been shadowed. He left the guards with a good character, and we can find nothing against him. His wife is a bad lot, though. I fancy she knows more about it than appears." "Have you shadowed her?" We've set one of our women onto her, Mrs. Tangi Drinks. And our woman has been with her twice when she was well on, but she could get nothing out of her. I understand that they have had brokers in the house. Yes, but they were paid off. Where did the money come from? Oh, that was all right. His pension was due. They have not shown any sign of being in funds. What explanation did she give of having answered the bell when Mr. Phelps rang for the coffee? She said that her husband was very tired and she wished to relieve him. Well, certainly that would agree with his being found a little later asleep in his chair. There is nothing against them, then, but the woman's character. Did you ask her why she hurried away that night? Her haste attracted the attention of the police constable. She was later than usual and wanted to get home. Did you point out to her that you and Mr. Phelps, who started at least 20 minutes after her, got home before her? She explains that by the difference between a bus and a hansom. Did she make it clear why, on reaching her house, she ran into the back kitchen? Because she had the money there with which to pay off the brokers. She has at least an answer for everything. Did you ask her whether in leaving she met anyone or saw anyone loitering about Charles Street? She saw no one but the constable. Well, you seem to have cross-examined her pretty thoroughly. What else have you done? The clerk, Goro, has been shadowed all these 9 weeks, but without result. We can show nothing against him. Anything else? Well, we have nothing else to go upon. No evidence of any kind. Have you formed any theory about how that bell rang? Well, I must confess that it beats me. It was a cool hand, whoever it was, to go and give the alarm like that. Yes, it was a queer thing to do. Many thanks to you for what you have told me. If I can put the man into your hands, you shall hear from me. Come along, Watson. Where are we going to now? I asked, as we left the office. We are now going to interview Lord Holdhurst, the Cabinet Minister and future Premier of England. We were fortunate in finding that Lord Holdhurst was still in his chambers at Downing Street, and on Holmes sending in his card, we were instantly shown up. The statesman received us with that old-fashioned courtesy for which he is remarkable, and seated us on the 2 luxurious easy chairs on either side of the fireplace. Standing on the rug between us, with his slight, tall figure, his sharp-featured, thoughtful face, and his curling hair prematurely tinged with grey, he seemed to represent that not too common type, a nobleman who is in truth noble. Your name is very familiar to me, Mr. Holmes, said he, smiling. And of course, I cannot pretend to be ignorant of the object of your visit. There has only been one occurrence in these offices which could call for your attention. In whose interest are you acting, may I ask? In that of Mr. Percy Phelps, answered Holmes. Ah, my unfortunate nephew. You can understand that our kinship makes it more impossible for me to screen him in any way. I fear that the incident must have a very prejudicial effect upon his career. But if the document is found, that of course would be different. I had 1 or 2 questions which I wish to ask you, Lord Holdhurst. I shall be happy to give you any information in my power. Was it in this room that you gave your instructions as to the copying of the document? It was. Then you could hardly have been overheard. It is out of the question. Did you ever mention to anyone that it was your intention to give out the treaty to be copied? Never. You are certain of that? Absolutely. Well, since you never said so, and Mr. Phelps never said so, and nobody else knew anything of the matter, then the thief's presence in the room was purely accidental. He saw his chance and he took it. The statesman smiled. You take me out of my province there, said he. Holmes considered for a moment. There is another very important point which I wish to discuss with you, said he. You feared, as I understand, that very grave results might follow from the details of this treaty becoming known. A shadow passed over the expressive face of the statesman. Very grave results indeed. And have they occurred? Not yet. If the treaty had reached, let us say, the French or Russian Foreign Office, you would expect to hear of it? I
That
should,
doesn't feel very good.
said Lord Holdhurst with a wry
I
face.
hope I'm not having another
Since
attack.
nearly 10 weeks have elapsed then, and nothing has been heard, it is not unfair to suppose that for some reason the treaty has not reached them. Lord Holdhurst shrugged his shoulders. We can hardly suppose, Mr. Holmes, that the thief took the treaty in order to frame it and hang it up. Perhaps he is waiting for a better price. If he waits a little longer, he will get no price at all. The treaty will cease to be a secret in a few months. That is most important, said Holmes. Of course, it is a possible supposition that the thief has had a sudden illness. An attack of brain fever, for example, asked the statesman, flashing a swift glance at him. I did not say so, said Holmes imperturbably. And now, Lord Holdhurst, we have already taken up too much of your valuable time, and we shall wish you good day. Every success to your investigation, be the criminal who it may, answered the nobleman, as he bowed us out at the door. He's a fine fellow, said Holmes, as we came out into Whitehall, but he has a struggle to keep up his position. He is far from rich and has many calls. You noticed, of course, that his boots had been resoled? Now, Watson, I won't detain you from your legitimate work any longer. I shall do nothing more today, unless I have an answer to my cab advertisement. But I shall be extremely obliged to you if you would come down with me to Woking tomorrow, by the same train which we took today. I met him accordingly next morning, and we travelled down to Woking together. He had had no answer to his advertisement, he said, and no fresh light had been thrown upon the case. He had, when he so willed it, the utter immobility of countenance of a Red Indian, and I could not gather from his appearance whether he was satisfied or not with the position of the case. His conversation, I remember, was about the Bertillon system of measurements, and he expressed his enthusiastic admiration of the French savant. We found our client still under the charge of his devoted nurse, but looking considerably better than before. He rose from the sofa and greeted us without difficulty when we entered. Any news? He asked eagerly. My report, as I expected, is a negative one, said Holmes. I have seen Forbes, and I have seen your uncle, and I have set 1 or 2 trains of inquiry upon foot, which may lead to something. You have not lost heart, then? By no means. God bless you for saying that, cried Miss Harrison. If we keep our courage and our patience, the truth must come out. We have more to tell you than you have for us, said Phelps, reseating himself upon the couch. I hoped you might have something. Yes, we have had an adventure during the night, and one which might have proved to be a serious one. His expression grew very grave as he spoke, and a look of something akin to fear sprang up in his eyes. Do you know, said he, that I begin to believe that I am the unconscious centre of some monstrous conspiracy, and that my life is aimed at, as well as my honour. Ah, cried Holmes, it sounds incredible, for I have not, as far as I know, an enemy in the world. Yet from last night's experience I can come to no other conclusion. Pray, let me hear it. You must know that last night was the very first night that I have ever slept without a nurse in the room. I was so much better that I thought I could dispense with one. I had a night light burning, however. Well, about 2 in the morning I had sunk into a light sleep, when I was suddenly aroused by a slight noise. It was like the sound which a mouse makes when it is gnawing a plank, and I lay listening to it for some time, under the impression that it must come from that cause. Then it grew louder, and suddenly there came from the window a sharp metallic snick. I sat up in amazement. There could be no doubt what the sounds were now. The faint ones had been caused by someone forcing an instrument through the slit between the sashes, and the second by the catch being pressed back. There was a pause then for about 10 minutes, as if the person were waiting to see whether the noise had awoken me. Then I heard a gentle creaking as the window was very slowly opened.
There we go.
I could stand it no longer, for my nerves are not what they used to be. I sprang out of bed and flung open the shutters. A man was crouching at the window. I could see little of him, for he was gone like a flash.
I gotta do the
He
feet
was wrapped in some sort of
and the
cloak,
horns I
which
need.
came across the lower part of his face.
I'll put the fangs in.
One thing only I
Wait
am
for
sure
horns.
of, and that
and
is
claws.
that he had some weapon in his hand.
Alright,
Look to
I'm
me.
calling it a night. I think that's long enough. My cat wants to go to bed, and frankly, so do I. Alright, good night, all. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you on the next one. Night. Ooh, where's the button? There it is.